Hello everyone and welcome to another video. I am SimplyG and today I'm going to be doing my collection overview. Yay! It's the end of the year, so as per usual I'm going to be going through all of my bookshelves, all of the stuff that I own. This of course is just some of it, the majority of it, but there are some things in the other rooms, mainly light novels, that type of thing. But as you can see, there's a lot, and I did just go through a big unhaul, but it didn't actually free up that much space. I'm sure that I will need to get a new bookcase in the coming months, but hopefully you guys enjoy. There's also some things that I'm not going to be showing off here that you will see in my December pickups, so even now the collection here is not fully complete. But this will give you a good idea of what this room looks like and what my collection as a whole looks like. So I hope you guys enjoy and I'll get straight into it. First and foremost, for this first bookcase, we have the box set of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind by Hayao Miyazaki. You can see that that first book is kind of pushed out of the box. That just means I haven't read it yet. This is one of the few series that is still on my physical to be read list. I don't have a huge amount of manga that I still need to read. I do try to stay on top of my backlog, but this series is one that I am still needing to get to, hopefully over the next month whilst I still have some free time. Next to that, of course, is Barefoot Gen. This is the last gasp release of this particular series. If you're not familiar, Barefoot Gen is a semi-autobiographical series about a young boy who is a direct victim of Hiroshima, his life during and after the Hiroshima bombings. It's very, very good, and actually this was the first ever manga to ever be released in English or translated into English, mainly because of the subject matter. It was an effort by A-bombing kind of sentiments and groups, so huge part of history, very, very important, and this is the complete hardcover release from Last Gasp. They did release the first 4 by themselves, and then it was a very long break, I think probably 2 years, until they released 5 to 10, and with that we do now have the entire collection in hard copy as well as softback, so you can get a non-hardback release as well. Next to that we have My Little Sailor versions of the Free Boys. Long-time viewers of my channel know I'm a big Free fan, and I own a lot of stuff in relation to this franchise. I don't care that some people think it's just a fan service show for girls. It's not. There's a lot to it, and it is a lot of fun, and I don't care. And, I like it so much. It gives me a lot of happiness, and these are pretty cute little prize figures from Taito. Really happy to have them in the collection. First on this shelf we have the 2 omnibuses of Go Nagai's Devilman. This is the only of the Seven Seas Classic collections that I own, and this is a very beloved, very well respected series from the 70s about a teenage boy who, along with his childhood best friend, have to fight demons, devils, who prehistorically, were frozen in the earth's crust, and in order to fight these devils, save humanity, and kind of stop the second coming of the religious apocalypse in which heaven rains down, fire and brimstone to destroy the devils. The idea is that devils are the original inhabitants of Earth, and in order to fight these various demonic beings, our main character, Akira, he takes on the soul of a very powerful demon devil called Amon, and as Devilman, as this fused being, he is more powerful than the devils and can fight them. Along with his best friend Ryo, they are trying to save the world. And if you have read this series or watched any of the multiple adaptations of this manga, especially the most recent Devilman Crybaby, which was phenomenal. You know that things don't actually work out too well for this duo. And, you know, not everything is as it seems. This is a wonderful story. Very, very 70s, so be aware of that. But it is really nice to have more of classic manga like this, especially from Go Nagai, who has been so influential over the course of his career. This one, I think, is definitely a easy one to recommend, especially if you have already watched Devilman or read about it. It's kind of a memeable series. The manga isn't perfect. There's a lot of very weird reactionary panels to it. It's of its age, but it's a fun time. And the translation, the English translation, is very aware of kind of its memeable state on the internet, which just makes it even more fun. Really wonderful. It's not a perfect series, but you can definitely tell why it was so influential and why people do love it to this day. It's really, really good. And I'm really happy to have it in the collection. Next is the entire series of Dorohedoro. We have volume 1 to 23, and this is a recently completed seinen series by Q Hayashida, released by Viz. Super wonderful, creative, magical. This is a story about our main character, Kaiman, who has a lizard head, and his friendship with a young woman who owns a gyoza's shop, and their kind of life in what is known as the Hole, where it's kind of just, you know, really terrible, and all of the people there live in like poverty. There's really nothing good about life in the Hole, and every so often sorcerers come in through a dimensional door and cause destruction, havoc, death, etc. We also see the daily lives of a particular group of these sorcerers and why they do come in and practice their magic and kill various people. It's really good. Very, very violent, so fair warning for that for people who are not into that. But this is one where, despite the violence, despite the absolute gruesome, grotesque art that can be within the series, it's very domestic. A lot of the characters are very likable. The relationship between characters, whether they be friendship, romantic, whatever else, are phenomenal to read, and you honestly, once you start, you can't really put it down. It's just one of those things where it's just really likable, and all of the characters feel like people, and you can get the various shades of their motivation as to why they act the way they do. Our main character, Kaiman, is in search of the sorcerer who changed his head to a lizard head to find out the mystery of who he is, because he doesn't actually remember, and that draws him into this wonderful world, quote unquote, of sorcerers and illicit drugs and kind of gang violence and all this sorts of things. It's just bizarre and crazy and wacky and out there and just all over the place, but I cannot recommend Dorohedoro enough. And at 23 volumes, it is now complete in English. And you can see, I mean, the last volume is a thick one. You get a lot of value over the course of the story, and it just continues to be wonderful throughout the entire course of it. Cannot recommend this one enough. Next is the 9-volume Josei series Tokyo Tarareba Girls by Akiko Higashimura. This also has a sequel series which has been licensed in English, currently digital only, but of course, like with this first series, which was also digital first, I'm sure we'll see the second part in print all too soon. This is a series about three women in their early 30s who are feeling the pressures of society and having self-doubt about their achievements, their lives. All of them are single, they don't have any kind of prospective partners, and they're all kind of in a pretty flat state within their career. So not only have they not achieved like husband, kids, happiness of a young woman that a lot of their friends and other people that they know have, but they're also not going in any sort of upward direction with their careers, which is kind of the alternative for a lot of women, societally speaking. The perception of what women have to have achieved by certain ages is definitely kind of weighing down on them. This series is really interesting because I think regardless of whether you're a woman, I think everyone has the anxieties of not having achieved things as society deems must be achieved by a certain age. It's incredibly painfully relatable for a lot of people, I think. And the great thing about Higashimura, who is a phenomenal mangaka just anyway, she's just incredible. But what I really love about her series is that all of her characters are very human. They make human mistakes, they make human decisions, which don't always equal good decisions, but they're very understandable as to the character and who they are and why they might be doing the things that they do. Is it sometimes frustrating? Absolutely. And I can't say that the decisions made in this series are ones that I personally would make, but for these characters you can understand absolutely why. So all three of these characters, they have various issues in their lives. They're having various issues in their love lives in particular. But our main character, she vows to herself that by the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, which for us currently is this coming year, 7 months away, 7-8 months away. For her, at this point was 3 or 4 years away. She wants to be married. She wants to have the dream, the husband, the kids, and to have herself set, as it were. That's not really what happens here, but it has a really, really critical look at adult relationships and adult decisions and what people value in relationships when you are in your late 20s, early 30s versus what you value in relationships when you are younger, and your perception of relationships and perceptions of commitment and making decisions about things that will affect the rest of your life. And what happiness is. It's really, really interesting. Again, I don't think you have to be a woman to kind of relate to this. I think there's certainly things that are universal regardless of gender, age, whatever else. But it's phenomenal. And I really look forward to the second part, the second season, or the sequel. I don't know when we'll see that in print, but as I said, I'm almost 100% sure, guaranteed that we will see it in print at some point. Higashimura is wonderful, and this is just one of her multitude of manga that is well worth the read and a must read, in my opinion. Finally, for this shelf, we have 1 to 9 of Happiness by Shuzo Oshimi, who you may be familiar with from Flowers of Evil. This is almost complete as a 10-volume series about adolescence and vampirism. This is about a teenage boy who is kind of a nerd, doesn't have any friends, gets picked on, and one night is attacked in the middle of the night by a young girl who sucks his blood, and then when he wakes up in the hospital, he has this kind of unquenchable thirst, this amazing strength, inhuman strength, and he doesn't really know much about what's going on, but he is struggling with his personal newfound lust and desires, and because of his physical changes, his personality changes a little bit, and his life changes. He becomes more personable with some of the people who were bullying him. He befriends people that he never would have as a more typical human, and a lot of the people around him and a lot of the people he values the most change, and it's really interesting. Like with a lot of Oshimi's titles, this is definitely an exploration of the darker aspects of the human condition and the human psyche. Like with all good vampire media, this always has the question of what makes someone a monster, versus what makes them a human. Are the physical changes like blood drinking, etc., the monstrous part, or can humans make just as monstrous decisions? And if so, does that make vampires or werewolves or whatever else the true monsters when we do have serial killers and, you know, serial rapists and whatever else? It's really, really wonderful. This, out of all of Oshimi's titles, is the one that I would say is probably the easiest to recommend and reread, because I find a lot of Oshimi's titles are either good for like a one-time experience, like Inside Mari, or they're just like very bleak, very bleak, like Flower of Evil. And that's not to say that those are bad series or not worth reading. Of course they are, but like with Inio Asano, I think you have to be in a very particular mindset to read his work. This is a little bit easier to recommend, and if you like vampire manga, if you don't mind violence and kind of a very dark tone, bleak tone, then I would say check this one out. And volume 10 is right around the corner, so it's almost complete, and yeah, really, really happy to finally own pretty much all of this series. On the next shelf, we have volumes 1 to 17, or the complete series of Lovecom, or Lovely Complex, by Aya Nakahara. This is a really, really fun high school romance comedy series about two teenagers, one who is a quote-unquote abnormally tall high school girl, and then a quote-unquote abnormally short high school boy. Their friendship, their romance, and the various things that they get up to throughout the course of the last 2 years of high school. I really, really like this particular series, especially for the kind of time or era of manga when it came out, because this couple, our girl is not, like, from Western perspective, she's not really that tall. She's like 172, 176 centimeters tall, which personally I've had friends, female friends, who are much taller than that. And our male character, I think he's in like 160 or 164 centimeters short, which is like my height, which I mean is it's short, but it's not like super duper like tiny. And again, I've known guys who are, you know, my height-ish, and I wouldn't call them, you know, that short. But in their first year of high school, they were kind of forced together as a pair a lot of the time because of their height difference and also their clashing personalities. They were regarded as a comedy duo. They kind of make fun of each other and tease each other and just kind of rile each other up, which they later find that they have a lot in common, that they're actually really well suited for each other, and they're become very good friends. But the main premise is that a transfer student starts, who Risa, our main female character, instantly has a crush on, she wants to get closer to, and Otani, our main male character, befriends. And so the two of them come to an agreement where Otani will help Risa get closer to this new transfer student if Risa helps Otani get closer to one of her friends, help each other's love lives a little bit, and that doesn't work out, but they soon kind of realize that they have feelings for each other. Tale is old as time, especially in manga. But this particular series is really goofy. I love the fact that Risa, our main character, she feels like a pretty human high school girl. She's not perfect, nor is she the more typical shoujo, like high school romance, wilting violet kind of wallflower of a shy girl, which is not a bad thing in manga, but she's kind of out there. She's very loud and brash, and she's very passionate about what she enjoys, which is gaming and music. And on the same hand, we have Otani, who is kind of this spitfire of a little guy. He does have certain hang-ups about being, like, his height and being made fun of for that, but he loves basketball. And the two of them share a love for a particular band or musician. They have a lot in common, and over the course of their friendship, they realize this, And there's a lot of comedy to be gained through their interactions. I really like how these two, they understand each other as more than just like an idealized version of the other person. Neither of them are the more typical high school romance kind of perfect partner. They have their faults, and the other knows that. They are closer as friends through the course of the series than they are romantic partners, because for a majority of it they are friends, and they, without having taken that like closer step to romance, they're very well suited. And I think that's something that for this era of manga was not always that common. There was a lot of like bad boy protagonists or couples that just didn't really seem to like each other. They didn't like to hang out with each other. They didn't have much in common, which is a sad thing. So it was really refreshing, especially as this was my first time experiencing this kind of relationship in manga, to see these characters who do have a lot in common, and even if they aren't like in love with each other, they still have a lot of fun with each other. They spend a lot of time together, and they understand each other's kinds of weaknesses and the things they're worried about, and they can support each other in a way that other couples of the era I didn't see from. So this is a really wonderful series. I highly recommend it, although it is out of print, I believe, and quite a few of the volumes are probably hard to get nowadays, but if you can find it, check it out. The anime is also available from Discotek, DVD only, but it is very funny, and I didn't mention this yet, but it's set in Osaka, so the anime, especially the Osaka, then the accent is thick and prolific, and it's just really fun to have some Osaka characters as protagonists. I think it gives more to these characters and their kind of brash personalities, their comedic interactions. It just works really well, and yeah, I really love it. It's not a perfect series. It does have like some issues that were fairly common for this genre, this demographic of the time, but even so, it does handle a lot of those issues in a pretty nuanced and understanding way. And yeah, just it's really good. Next is Mushishi, the complete series 1 to 10, the last being a 3-in-1 omnibus. This is another out-of-print title, one that is incredibly important to me, one of my absolute favorite series of all time. I love the anime, I love the manga, I just love everything related to Mushishi. It is no longer in print. It's one of the final of Del Rey's titles that was put out, published, finished before that trade-off to Kodansha happened, which is why the last 3 volumes are in a 3-in-1 omnibus, just so they could get it all out, so it wasn't dropped midway through. But you can still read this legally via Kodansha. It's a digital release, and I know a lot of people don't necessarily like digital releases, but I would encourage you to support that if you are wanting to read it, because legal is always better. And you know, at least if you are buying the digital copies from Kodansha, it shows that there's still interest. And I mean, maybe miracles can happen. We've seen it a lot this last year, where we do get an older out-of-print title back in print. So, if you're not familiar with this series, it's a seinen by Yuki Oroshibara, and it is about a young man called Ginko who travels around Japan, and he has the ability to see mushi, which are, within the series, a kind of very basic yokai type of natural creature, not to the same level of a yokai as something like Natsune's Book of Friends, where like the kitsune and tengu and things like that. These are more like a more base natural energy creature. You can really relate them to something like a fungi or an insect. They don't really have a higher level of brain power, as it were. And as such, they don't really have motivations to cause havoc or to cause trouble amongst humanity, but they just want to interact and kind of exist within the natural world. Unfortunately, sometimes that means that they do negatively impact humans in their lives. And so Ginkgo's role is to kind of be the mediator between the two sides, usually helping the humans with the mushi that they've unknowingly encroached on, and getting rid of the mushi and healing them from whatever ails them because of that. There are many of these stories or these chapters within the series that are reminiscent of folklore in Japan. There's a lot of kind of moral messages as to like, oh, maybe don't do this, and then you won't have this happen. It's very fairy tale-esque, but it's amazing. It's beautiful. It's atmospheric, and it's quite low-key, down-to-earth slice of life with a darker twist. It certainly has its elements of horror. It certainly has its elements of body horror. So it's not as bad as something like a Junji Ito work, but be aware that there can be quite viscerally shocking and creepy parts of this manga. I adore it. I love Ginkgo as a character. Too many of these chapters or too many of these stories are phenomenal. I can't even pin down my favorite because there's just so many. And although it is a longer series at 10 volumes, and although it is out of print, each chapter is fairly self-contained, so there's not a large overarching plot necessarily. So if you are wanting to just pick up random volumes wherever you see them, you're not going to be missing out too much. There are kind of particular stories that are about Ginkgo in his childhood, and other characters that do kind of reoccur throughout the series, but again, there's not like a huge overarching plot line, so you're not going to be missing too much if you read it out of order. Phenomenal series. I love it. I bought it all in one lot off of eBay years and years and years ago. I'm sure that you can still get lots on eBay, but it is very overpriced. I wouldn't recommend it. As I said, if you are wanting to read it and you don't mind digital, read it that way. Also, the anime I cannot recommend highly enough. The first season is available via Funimation on disc. The second season does not have a US disc release. It did get a DVD release here in Australia, which I own, but you can also watch that on Crunchyroll and other various streaming platforms, I believe. It's incredible, it's beautiful, and I love it. Long-time viewers of my channel know that I'm a huge fan of this kind of story, of this kind of yokai, slice of life, atmospheric story, and Mushishi is kind of the first that I ever experienced, and it still remains to this day one of my absolute favorites. Next is volumes 1 to 10, again a complete series of After School Nightmare by Satoshi Mizushiro. This was released by Golcomi, who no longer exist. This is a really interesting, I want to say kind of almost magical realist type of story about high school and high schoolers who have to, in a particular class, fight each other in this dreamlike state, and whoever wins this sort of battle royale-esque showdown graduates from the school. I am not always a fan of Mizushiro's work, but this is a really interesting one. All of her work definitely has an interesting idea and premise, and this one is certainly one that the journey I think is more fulfilling than the ending. I know some people had issues with the ending, but I think it tied a lot of the larger themes together. Our main character, Ichijo Mashiro, I think, is an anomaly within this this school. They have a secret. They are not fully male or female, i.e. they're an intersex character, so in their body, like the upper half is male, the lower half is female. This is how it is described. Not, perfect language for it, but because of that, Mashiro has this kind of inner conflict of their own gender identity, their own sexuality, and as you can see on this cover, there are two other students who Mashiro has personal relationships with, and later has a conflict of romantic relationships with these two, obviously one being a young man and other being a young woman, and again how that plays into our main character's sexuality, their gender identity, and how they recognize themselves through their interactions with these two and the other people in the school and around them. It's very, very good. It's really interesting, and like, again, with Mizushiro's work, there's a lot of very curious themes and potential. It's not a perfect series, obviously, but if you like stories that play around with gender, that it is a little bit older, so of course it's not, I would say, a perfect representation on certain things, but I don't expect it to be, or you shouldn't expect it to be. And I think also it's not really meant to be really if you go into it just because there's an intersex character, you aren't going to be happy by the end of it, if that makes sense, because there are certain character choices that are very intriguing, and there's a lot of the series focuses on the choices that these characters make. It's very, very good. One that I don't see a lot of people talk about because it's not very well known and it is a little bit older and is out of print, but I do think it's fairly easy to find, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, check it out. Black Rose Alice is Mizushiro's current work, or other English released work, as well as Seven Seas' BL release of The Cornered Mouse Dreams of Cheese, I think is the name of that. So they do have other works available in English, but this is my favorite of all of those, although I still need to read the BL one, and I am looking forward to it. I've heard nothing but good things. But this is really interesting. Yeah, check it out. Finally, for this shelf, we have two of Drawn Quarterly's releases for Kitaro by Shigeru Mizuki. This is a beloved, long children's horror series. If you've never heard of Kitaro, that's pretty amazing because it has had various anime adaptations over the years. It currently has an anime adaptation airing and being released on Crunchyroll. And because it is so long, because it is older, if you're not aware, Mizuki is he kind of created the yokai genre within manga. So the Kitaro is sort of the birth of yokai stories for comics. And this is a series about a young yokai boy, the last of the ghost clan, or the last of the yokai, called Kitaro, who sort of acts as a messenger in between humanity and yokai. The first volume that I have is The Birth of Kitaro. It's the first one. It's where he is born. And the second that I have is Kitaro, the Vampire Slayer. All of these books from Drawn Quarterly, aside from, including the old one, which is a much larger release, are curated stories chosen by the translator, who is close friends with Mizuki throughout the later part of his life. So these are kind of the best stories from the 170 odd chapters or whatever it is of Kitaro. So although it's not like the entire series, it's a fairly comprehensive work. And there are, like with Mushishi, these are quite self-contained chapters. You have to think of them sort of like a Goosebumps book, where each is again kind of a moral play. and they're for kids. I mean, they're kind of creepy and spooky and goofy, but they're not terrifying, aside from like how a Goosebumps book is kind of creepy for kids. It's really wonderful. I'm a huge fan of Mizuki's work, and I'm so glad that we're finally getting Kitaro in English. I am expecting more of these volumes soon, so I am hoping to catch up with these releases over the course of the next couple months, just because it is one that I do really want to support. And it's just really wonderful to see, again, another classic manga. This one is even older. This is late 60s, early 70s, and just so wonderful. And Kitaro has had huge influence in Japan to this day. It's just, yeah, really great. Kitaro is a great character, iconic, and a lot of the characters in this manga, a lot of the yokai actually entered into like yokai lore because of Kitaro, because of the popularity of this manga, so which is incredible. I highly recommend the current anime. It's really fun. Again, it's kind of a kids show. Don't expect, high art from it, but there's a lot of morals, a lot of really great messages that even today are super relevant. And the great thing about Kitaro and all of its various anime adaptations is that it can be updated and changed and shifted to be relevant to the issues that people face today. The very first episode of the new Kitaro anime is about social media use and kind of the dangers of that, which obviously is something that kids are faced with. It's really good. It's really good, guys. And it's fun and funny and just quirky and weird. And I'm, again, really happy that Mizuki's hopeful, fun kid stuff is finding its way to English, as well as his more serious wartime or anti-war manga that he is more well known for in English, which is just as important, but a little less enjoyable to read. On the next shelf, we have Banana Fish by Akemi Yoshida. This is volume 1 to 19, the entire series, aside from the light novels and other bits and bobs here and there. But this is a 80s/early 90s shoujo manga you may be familiar with thanks to the most recent anime adaptation, but it's the story of a young Japanese photographer who is working for a journalist who goes to New York to cover the gang wars and the gang violence in New York amongst the various young people. Whilst there, he meets the head of a particular gang called Ash Lynx, who he kind of, through various circumstances, quickly befriends. And it's a very dark, violent story that handles a lot of very dark themes, things like child sexual assault and child pornography, government corruption, the use of narcotics within the the armed services and the government. Again, corruption of drug distribution within the U.S. Military and the armed services occupation in various countries, and that how the U.S. government and military has kind of been behind the scenes in control of a lot of the world skirmishes over the past however long since the Second World War. This is set in the 80s, but the most recent anime has been updated to current day. Again, not a perfect series. I think there's a lot of issues with it, but I really like what this series represents. And if you are a fan of really dark, gritty action series, if you don't mind stories that do have very dark themes that affect our protagonists pretty directly, then check it out. I've heard this described as a shoujo that, you know, is for people who don't like the demographic. It's certainly not what a lot of people think of when they hear the word shoujo. But it's very good. The relationship between our main characters, Eiji and Ash, is again kind of its time, the 70s of or the 80s within shoujo manga of the you know, not subtle homoeroticism of it. These two characters are drawn together in a very intimate way, although there's no kind of on-page romance, as it were. It's a little bit hard to argue that there isn't some very deep emotional feelings between these two. And it's not a happy story. Ultimately, this is a tragedy, and there's no happy endings here. So be well aware with that. I'm really happy that we have seen this series finally make its way to print once again, thanks to the most recent anime adaptation, because it was out of print for a very long time, and it is one that people were wanting. It's very unlike a lot of its fellow series. It's an early release and translation from Viz, and it's kind of a shame that this series didn't get an updated translation because it really needed it, but I'm just happy to have it on the shelves, frankly. If you haven't tried out the anime, do check it out. It's very, very good. If you like the anime, pick up the manga. It's almost hilarious in how much the recent resurgence in Banana Fish has influenced the world yet again. I think a lot of the themes in this are still hugely relevant. You know, countries and things may have changed, but there's a lot of stuff here that is covered in this series that is very, very true to life and still important to talk about. But almost even more so, it's kind of funny if, for those who are unaware, the New York Public Library, which is a very iconic place, setting within this manga, especially for the finale of this manga, has had a huge surge in popularity, in profits, because of this manga, because of fans across the globe, but most notably Japanese fans, going there and taking photos, buying merchandise, buying things, and just wanting to experience this place. There's been newspaper coverage over it, and it's kind of amazing. I know that profits for the New York Public Library doubled over the 2 or 3 years since this series kind of got more interest. And I mean, there's very few series, I would say, that do have that kind of real world effect on people's lives and on iconic places like that. You do see it in Japan a lot when a popular series is set in a small town or prefecture, but it's not so often that you get the kind of pilgrims, the Japanese pilgrims, going to an international location. And the fact that it's set in New York, I think, brings it closer to home for a lot of people. Yoshida has a great love for the city, I feel. And although her characters don't always have the happiest of lives, there's something quite powerful about Banana Fish, and it's not one that I can recommend for everyone because it does deal with so many dark issues and so many kind of triggering things. But if you're okay with that, and if you're aware of that, you know that you can handle that, then I definitely give it a shot. Okay, this is, as you can see, Navari no Volume 1 to 14, complete yet again by Yuki Kamitani. released by Yen Press. This is a fairly recent addition to the collection. I finished it last year. I read it for the first time last year. Absolutely fell in love with it. For longtime viewers of the channel, you will know how much this series grew on me and how much I came to love it over the course of reading it. For those unaware, Yuki Kamitani is a mangaka who has a more recent series released in English, Our Dreams at Dusk, or Shimanami Tasagare by Seven Seas, which is in relation to kind of the LGBT community and queer culture in Japan and self-acceptance and various other elements. But this is Kamitani's first serialized work. It's older, you can definitely tell it's one of their earliest works, and you can see how much Kamitani grew from volume 1 to volume 14. From the premise of the series, I had known about it for a long time, thanks in part to Funimation's trailers of the anime, and the trailers really, really misrepresented it. I did not want to watch it, did not want to read it, had zero interest, and it wasn't until the last couple of years that I gave it a shot because of my love for Our Dreams at Dusk, and I am still upset that the Funimation trailers made me dislike the series so much that it took until now for me to read it and fall in love with it. If you're not aware, again, the premise of this doesn't really represent it well, but Navari no O is the story of a middle school student who finds himself in the middle of a fight, a clan war between various ninja clans, because he holds a particular art, ninja art, which people want. They want it, it's all-powerful, and those who can possess it are like the king of the shadow world, which again sounds kind of goofy and not really. The trailer and I think the initial kind of first volumes of this, it really plays up the action comedy kind of premise, but that's not what the series is at all. Once you get to about midway through volume 3, you really see a shift. Volume 4 absolutely changes the game. Volume 10 will emotionally wreck you. Volume 14, you will be in love. It honestly, as I said, from volume 1 to volume 14, it feels like a completely different series. And it's not that the first volumes were bad, but they are very of its time, of this kind of shonen, kind of action comedy type of series that later gets heavier on the drama. Something like Black Butler or Pandora Hearts, I would kind of relate it to. It has elements of both of those, but there's something. So our main character Miharu has really no interest in getting involved with this ninja skirmish. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about the ninja clan stuff. He has 2 classmates who are also of various ninja clans, and a teacher who is kind of his guardian, who looks after him. And he's very apathetic to these individuals' encouragements of him, trying to give or keep the art safe, or to give it to someone who is more safe or more capable or whatever else. And it isn't until our other kind of protagonist or main character, antagonist, however you want to qualify him, Yoite, who is here, this character here, who is part of the kind of bad ninja clan, who has this power, this ninja art to cause death, threatens these other people in Miharu's life, that he kind of gets more serious about it. But then he learns about Yoite's circumstances and that the fact that his power slowly affects his his life and his lifespan, and it's actively killing him. And they come to an agreement on this particular art and how to sort out all of these things that are going on. And oh boy, we got some soulmates here, kids. I've spoken about Yuki Kamitani before in regards to Our Dreams at Dusk. Of course, they are, if you're not aware, a asexual, ex-gendered, or non-binary creator. So please, if you are talking about them, use the they pronouns. But because of that, there's a lot of gender and sexuality stuff within their manga. And that's no different in this manga. It isn't as blatant or as obvious as in Our Dreams at Dusk, where that is the focus of the story. But it is still there, and it is still an active part of some of these characters' motivations. This story is beautiful. It reminds me a lot, and it's very evocative at certain parts of the Galactic Railroad. So if you have seen that film or read that short story, then maybe you know what I'm talking about. There's particular parts that just absolutely break my heart. And by the end of it, this story that started off as kind of like a early or mid-2000s kind of low-key action series with a bit of drama, a bit of comedy, ends up being a really powerful story about human connection and regret and grief and all of these things, and it makes me cry, and I love it. So needless to say, Navari no O is a series that I hold near and dear to my heart, and I really hope that we see more of Kamitani's work in English. I'm hoping that with the popularity of Our Dreams at Dusk, we may see Shonen Note, which I need to own, as well as some of their other serialized work. And oh, the art is beautiful. Again, the evolution of art, the improvement of art over the course of this series in particular is phenomenal, and I highly recommend you try it out. But again, this is out of print, and some of the volumes are very hard to find, so it's hard for me to recommend to pick up. And the anime adaptation is not like it has an anime original ending, which isn't bad. I think it's effective, but there are points where I'm like, that's just dumb. And I do think the manga story is stronger. So yeah, check out this series. Next finally on this shelf, we have the complete series of Kiss Him Not Me by Junko. This is a reverse harem shoujo manga comedy about a girl who previously is a huge fujoshi, huge nerd, huge fangirl, and is also overweight, but after the death of her favorite character within her favorite series, she cloisters herself away in her room for a week, crying, doesn't eat, loses all of this weight, comes back to school and is hot, and all of the guys love her. Which is a premise that is very problematic in a lot of ways, but I find that Junko is very self-aware, and she does it in a very funny way. None of these characters, although there are issues and some of these characters are motivated by how she looks and how much she's changed, over the course of the series, they all do start, you can see how their views of her shift and how much her personality means to them versus how she looks. And Kay, our main character, she doesn't actually change personalities a whole bunch. She's a pretty unapologetic fujoshi, and so even the title, like, Kiss Him Not Me, I'm not really interested in romance. I much prefer if you boys were kissing each other. So we have 4 main male protagonists. We have 2 of her classmates whom she, in her previous life, as it were, and still currently kind of actively ships together. She has an underclassman, and she has her senpai from her club, all of who are pretty standard kind of personality types within the this kind of reverse harem thing. We have kind of a pretty confident guy. We've got kind of the brat. We've got like the understanding, soothing guy, and kind of just the more generic like romance hero. I love Junko's work. I was familiar with her BL manga or yaoi manga for a long time. She has a lot of great series. I love her comedy. She is so funny. And because she does have a background in BL, it does lend this series a lot more self-awareness. She knows how to make fun of the Fujoshi mindset without being actively mean about it, which is really refreshing, really nice to see. And I really like this series because of how much not only our male characters change, or don't change as well, but how much our protagonist changes as well, and how she has to kind of reassess herself and adapt and grow up a little bit. And also, I'm not a huge fan of like otome series or series with a lot of like reverse harem elements, just in general, or harems either. Like, I'm just not really into it, mainly because my favorite characters, my favorites for the romance, are never successful. Like, they're never the end game. This series, end game! I did it for once, and I'm really happy that Junko seems to agree with me on who the kind of end game final romantic partner is and should have been. And I think that it was set up fairly early, and there's a bit of a bait and switch and a lot of like expectations that I think people might have been tricked by because of the normal tropes of this genre. But I don't think I'm alone in which male character I think was boyfriend material. This is a really fun series. Again, I'm always leery of a story that uses rapid weight loss, and like, oh, I suddenly turned hot as like a motivating factor, and for a value judgment for our characters. But really, that isn't what this series is, and it actively deconstructs those tropes and that expectations fairly early on. There are certain aspects that bring that up again. She gains weight, and certain characters want her to lose weight again, and it addresses it very, very well, and it's not kind of the key to her becoming this popular, wonderful girl who really is, everybody's dream girl. She's still kind of a super dork who wants to see fictional boys kissing. And sure, she may be smaller now, but that doesn't really change who she is. Yeah, it's wonderful. I had all the faith in Junko when this series started, because I remember when it was first coming out and I was reading it on Crunchyroll. And she did not disappoint me. I'm so glad that I can have another Junko series on my shelf and in my collection and say, yes, this is the best. Also, later on, we are introduced to kind of like a fifth romantic partner, potentially, in the series, who is a girl. And it's really nice to see her interest treated seriously as well. So, there's a lot of really good stuff in this series, even if it has kind of a goofy premise. Next shelf, we have volume 1 to 11 of Again by Mitsuru Kubo. This is almost complete. Volume 12 is the last one, and I'm really looking forward to this particular series ending. I love Again. This is a series, I've said it with Mitsuru Kubo's works before, but it's like very unpredictable in a good way. Like, it's a positive way that is unpredictable. But this series is about a teenage boy who, on the day of his graduation, falls down the stairs and is given a second chance to redo his high school years and make changes, because in his first attempt he wasn't popular, he didn't have any friends, nobody liked him, and he just didn't really have any motivation in life. Now he has joined the Oendan, or the cheer club, the male cheer squad, if you're not familiar with what an Oendan is. And because in his first year of high school, originally the Oendan shut down. It didn't get any new members, and so thus it was stopped, And so now he's joined and is trying to save the Oendan from that fate. But because of this, like, his personality hasn't really changed. He's still pretty shy. He's still pretty aloof, and although he is making changes in his life, and he has made a lot more friends, and people kind of recognize him now and respect him more, he's still kind of his own worst enemy in a lot of ways. It's really, really fun. Of course, like with a lot of time travel, second chance manga, it brings up the question, like, what would you do if you were given a second chance? How would you change things? Should you change things? And even whenever you think that the series has made a decision in something, you will not be able to predict, like, how things roll out or how things work. It definitely keeps you on your toes, and that's something I love about this particular manga. All of the characters are really wonderful. They're very relatable teens in a way that I've said this about Kubo's series before, but none of her characters are necessarily good people, but they are realistic people. They do dumb things and they make bad decisions, but she doesn't let them get away with those dumb decisions just because they're the protagonist. They have to face the consequences of their actions, and she holds them accountable for everything that they do, which is really refreshing. She's also a phenomenal comics artist. I think her characters are so expressive. Her paneling is phenomenal. The use of, like, the variation in lines is amazing. Really, her characters are super duper expressive. They jump off of the page, and you can feel the energy in each scene. There's some great reaction faces in here. And if you've ever been that kid who's, like, not super popular, doesn't really, kind of a loner, kind of doesn't want to hang out with anyone, and you don't have an issue with being a loner, and you're kind of just like a grumpy little shit, this is a manga for you, because I think it definitely taps into that personality very, very well. I love this series. I am going to be really sad when it's over, but I cannot wait to see how it ends. Next on this shelf is the complete 1-6 of Akka 13, Territory Inspection Department by Natsume Ono, released by Yen Press. Natsume Ono is a creator that I have great respect for, and I really like this particular series of hers. It's very Ono. This is the story of a officer of the Akka, the territory inspectors. This is set in a world where there is a country with 13 different territories and various different cultures and societies within each territory, all very vastly different, but the Akka are kind of the overruling government, or not necessarily military, but the day-to-day type of government that just, like, oversees that trades are going on and things are fine and there's no skirmishes in various territories and whatever else. We have Jean, our main character, who is within the central Akka department, and he is sent to all 13 territories to, basically as an auditor, just to make sure things are fine, things are going okay. But there is rumors that there's a coup, that various territories are wanting to overthrow the ruling monarchy. And so he is also kind of in part maybe acting as a messenger between the various territories and communicating these revolutionary ideologies. Now, Jean is kind of a very unmotivated worker. He's not super duper invested in his job, and he would be quite happy to not have to deal with any of this shit. But he's a curious figure in of himself. You can see he's smoking on the cover here, but he's regarded as Jean the Smoker, because within this country, within this society, smoking is very, very, very hard and an expensive habit to have, because cigarettes are outlawed or heavily taxed, heavily expensive because of the king's decree for his health. I think he was a avid smoker in his youth, so since he is now elderly, he's in his 90s, they outlawed it to stop him from being able to smoke, pretty much. So the fact that he is a quite avid smoker, our main character, and has the accessibility to cigarettes on his pitiful government wage, draws a lot of attention and makes him a little bit suspicious. He also has his best friend, who is a journalist, Nino. And then his sister, who she is a student, but she also, along with Jean, works as kind of the landlord to a large apartment building that they do not own, but they kind of look after everybody and, fix any problems that people may have. It's a low-key, very Ono seinen, but it does have this element of, revolutionary coup and government intrigue and, all of these things. It's a slow burn, like all of Ono's works, but I absolutely adore this one. Check out the anime. It's very good. It's a great adaptation. I love it. And you kind of get drawn in very slowly through interacting with all of these different territories that Jean is finding himself in, seeing how different the cultures and the people are of each place, and slowly being drawn into the mystery of what's really going on and how things really are. It's great. At 6 volumes, it's not super duper long, but it is one of Ono's longer series. There is one other one that is longer that you will see later in this video. And cannot recommend this one enough. If you like slow-paced, slice of life type of series with a hint of mystery, if you like reveling in food, most notably bread, then check this one out. Finally, for manga on the shelf, we have volumes 1 and 2 of Akiko Higashimura's Blank Canvas, My So-Called Artist Journey, which is a 5-volume series in all. This is released by 7 Seas. Volume 3 was just recently released, but this is Higashimura's autobiographical manga about what else? Her artist journey, the journey of her becoming who she is now, this phenomenal mangaka, but the struggles she had throughout her youth in deciding to be an artist and trying to find her place and to kind of take art as a job seriously. I think every artist, like actual artists or people who want to have art or illustration as their career, should read this. I think it is very relatable for people who've gone through similar things. And it's really, in my opinion, it's really nice to have a series like this that, for a creator who is now so beloved across the world for her various manga, for her to show her rough starts, to show her struggles, her failures, you know, obviously it takes a lot of hard work, it takes a lot of practice, it takes a lot of time to reach success for most people. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day, and I think when you only see the final product of something that is seen as like wonderful and amazing, and she's a creator who, in my opinion, has made countless phenomenal manga over the course of her career, it can be easy to forget that, you know, she's done a lot of hard work to get here. She wasn't just handed to her on a silver platter. She didn't just immediately have a hit via Princess Jellyfish. It took a long time. So needless to say, I think this is a really important series for all sorts of creatives, but artists in particular. And I'm really, really, really happy that we have gotten this series and that it is getting a fairly quick release. So hopefully we will see Volume 5 before the end of next year. And I can say we have another Higashimura series finished in the collection. On the rest of the shelf it's just mainly display. We have some photographs and illustrations of myself and my sister. Old, super duper old, very out of date. We also have the Funimation DVD limited edition release of the first season of Black Butler, as well as the Aniplex 1/8 scale of Ciel or Ciel Phantom Hive from Black Butler. Beautiful figure. I really like the Black Butler series, the manga especially. It's goofy and like not entirely serious, but if you like kind of tense Victorian horror mystery with the kind of supernatural twist, check it out. It's way better than I think a lot of people give it credit for. And Ciel is a wonderful character. He's a really intriguing protagonist, and they did such a beautiful job on this figure. The detail is so beautiful. Pricey. He was limited and exclusive to particular stores, but so happy to have him in the collection. First on the next shelf we have the 1/10 scale of Kino and Hermes from Kino's Journey, most particularly Kino's Journey the Beautiful World, which is a series. Well, Kino's Journey, the original, is one that I really love. I do hope we see someday the light novels licensed once again. Really love Kino. They're a pretty interesting character, and I really like the low-key, again, episodic vibe, pretty self-reflective vibe of the series overall. And behind that is the limited edition Blu-ray box set from Japan, the first one of Hyoka, my absolute favorite Kyoto Animation series of all time. That is a box that I got whilst I was in Japan a couple years ago now, and it is really beautiful. I love the artwork for this particular series. Obviously it's Kyoani, it's just beautiful, and so I use this one like with the Black Butler. I use it just kind of as a little bit of display. As for manga, firstly we have 1-15 of Oku, The Inner Chambers by Fumi Yoshinaga. For those who are not familiar with my channel, this is my absolute favorite mangaka of all time. I love all of her works, and this is her currently ongoing historical fiction retelling of Japanese history, but with a twist. All of the major characters or major historical figures are women in this iteration of the history, because the basic premise is that Japan was overcome by a pox that only affected young boys and men, and as such the male population of the island is much reduced to actual reality. So because of this, women have had to take the place of their male counterparts, and so now are the most powerful individuals in, you know, the Senate, in government, in business, and whatever else. It's wonderful. I love Yoshinaga. That she's an amazing character writer, and she makes this, although it is like just typical Japanese history, you may not be familiar with it anyway, but she just writes it in such a compelling way that I cannot wait to read more. Volume 10 really, again, hit me so hard in the feels. That particular arc was phenomenal, and I absolutely adore the series overall. It is ongoing in Japan, and I don't know when or if it will wrap up anytime soon, but I'm just so happy that we are getting this series in its entirety in English, thanks to Viz. Next to Oku, I have another Yoshinaga title. This one is kind of very different, although no less brilliant. This is What Did You Eat Yesterday, volume 1 to 13, so up to date with this series as well. This is a vertical release, and this is Yoshinaga's ongoing recipe domestic food manga about a gay couple in Tokyo and the various meals that they share together. Our main character, Shiro, who is this character here, he's a lawyer. His boyfriend or his partner is a hairdresser called Kenji. And the great thing about this, not only is it just a wonderful story about how food brings people together and the role that food plays in people's everyday lives, sharing a meal with the people you care about, preparing food for the people you care about. It is a really thorough recipe-based manga, so each chapter has a different recipe that generally Shiro is making and goes through every single step. So if you read this manga, you can make pretty much every meal step by step just by following the instructions. But even more so than that, I really liked this particular manga because not only is it of a gay couple in Japan, but it's of an older gay couple. This is both Kenji and Shiro at this point in the books in volume 13 are in their 50s, and the series does span over pretty much the entirety of their relationship, not the very beginning, but they've lived together for 15 years. They are truly a domestic couple. They understand each other and feel like, you know, an old married couple who have been together for a long time. Shiro is very particular about budgeting for the food and his own personal health, how he looks. He's a little bit of a narcissist in that regard. Whereas Kenji, he's a little bit more easygoing and excitable and flamboyant, more openly gay, as it were, compared to his partner. And he's kind of the little bit of fun that Shiro needs in his life, because otherwise he's just a little bit too much of an uptight, pain-in-the-ass lawyer. And they work really well as a couple. You can understand why they've been together for so long, why they care about each other so much. And all of the food looks delicious, sounds delicious. Kenji's enthusiasm and reactions to all of the meals encourages you to want to make food of a similar quality for your own loved ones. And I will always love Yoshinaga for how well she portrays the domesticity of the everyday meal and the importance that eating and food has in life and in culture, and the role it plays in our lives with the people we care about. It's really, really wonderful. And I cannot encourage people to read this series enough. Again, very different from Oku. All of her series are pretty different in premise, but I can absolutely recommend every single one of them. And this one is... Oku is not out of print. It's fairly easy to get all of the volumes. This one, because it is vertical, there are some volumes that are harder to find, but I would encourage you to track the series down ASAP. I hate it when people miss out because titles do go out of print. And this is one that I do wish more people read, especially if you're into food manga, if you're into domestic, kind of slice of life, funny, fun series. Because really, this series, Yoshinaga, all of her series, has a real humor and wit to them. She has a wonderful sense of snappy comedy that is relatable and not like at the expense of anyone aside from maybe their attitude. It's just really wonderful and I love it. I want more people to read it. And this one, although it's not technically classified as an LGBT manga like something like The Bride Was a Boy or Our Dreams at Dusk, etc. This one still obviously features queer characters, and I think it is because of the domesticity of it and kind of the down-to-earth slice of life feel. If you are a fan of LGBT manga, I would encourage you to check it out because it's nice to have an older, established gay couple who are a little bit further along in their relationship compared to most gay couples that we see in manga. Usually it's the beginning of a relationship or them falling in love. This is two people who have done that and they're living together and have been living together for the better part of 2 decades. So obviously their priorities and their interactions are very different. And it's not every day that we see an older established couple, whether it's heterosexual or queer, in manga at all. So the fact that Yoshinaga is able to capture, again, this established relationship dynamic so well is very rare, and I encourage people to check it out. On the next shelf, the first series that I have is Cross Game by Mitsuru Arachi, the only of Arachi's manga, I believe, that we have in English. For those not familiar with Arachi, he's kind of the father of baseball manga in Japan. This is a 17-volume series, or 8 omnibus volumes. The first one a 3-in-1, the others a 2-in-1s, and follows a young teenage boy who and his childhood friend throughout his kind of reacquaintance with baseball in their childhood. He was friends with his family runs like a sporting goods store, and the family friends, they run a batting center, so obviously baseball hitting. And he was in love with one of the daughters of this family. She was the second oldest, I believe. She had an older sister and 2 younger sisters. But during the summer, when they were 11 years old, this girl unfortunately drowned and passed away. And since then, he still cares about her a lot. Her sister, her most close in age sister, so the just younger one, only a year difference. She never really got along with him, and they're kind of always at each other's throats. But both together, they're kind of trying to make the second daughter, his girlfriend, quote unquote, dream come true in being a pitcher for Koshen, which is like the major high school baseball tournament in Japan. It's like with all of Arachi's manga, although it is a sports series, it is first and foremost like a character drama. I really like how these characters interact, and he's perfected his formula down to an art. It is such a shame that this is the only one of his numerous series that has gotten a print release, so English licensing at all, full stop. I think more people may be familiar with Touch. He has another series, like, I think called H2O or H2, something along those lines, which have had anime adaptations, and Major is another one, I believe. But he really kind of perfected the baseball genre within sports manga. Touch is beloved in Japan and in Europe. And I don't know if this is true. I'm sure people can correct me on this, but I feel like this is the only, or one of the only, baseball manga that we have in English, at least in print, that I'm aware of. As I said, that may be incorrect, but it kind of surprises me that we don't have more baseball manga available, because for those who are unaware, I know we do have Ace of Diamond, but that is currently digital only from Kodansha. But otherwise, nothing is immediately coming to mind. Baseball is hugely popular in Japan, and considering how popular it is in the US, or at least from my perspective, it seems like a popular sport in the US, I'm surprised it's not a sport that, or sports manga that gets a lot of traction outside of Japan, because there are a lot. I mean, Ace of Diamonds we are getting, but it is digital only. Big Wind Up is another one that has a large following thanks to the anime, but doesn't have any kind of manga licensing. It's just a little bit of a curiosity that of all of the sports manga that we are getting, especially over the last 5 years, basketball's been popular with Slam Dunk and Kuroko and even Real. Of course, Haikyuu has been hugely popular. iShield 21 is American football, so that makes sense. Yomushi Pedal is cycling. We're getting a lot. There's a lot of rugby series and soccer series that are getting digitally released or print release as well, but very few baseball series, and I don't know why that is. I don't know whether it's just because there's still kind of this perception that manga fans don't like sports series, which is totally false, or that like nerds aren't into sports. But it might also just be because of length, age, printing costs, whatever else. I'm not quite sure. But I would like to see more baseball manga come to print, because I do like a lot of them. Arachi is a little bit older. His style and his famous manga are a little bit outside of the current popular trends, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was some more new fun baseball manga out there that people might be interested in. Next is another, if what not unconventional sports manga with Hikaru no Go. This is obviously about Go, the board game, which is a very Japanese-centric game. I have volumes 1 to 23, so the entire series, and this is by Yumi Hota, who writes the story, and Takashi Obata, who you may know from like Death Note and Bakuman fame. And this is the story of a elementary school boy who, through the power of a Go board that he discovers in his grandfather's attic, is possessed and becomes haunted by the spirit of a legendary Go player called Sai, and through his haunting partnership learns to love Go and unlock his potential as a Go master, and learn to play the game and enjoy the game. And it follows his life from like the 6th grade up until probably 10th or 12th grade, so solid chunk of his life as a young person, and him trying to get better and better at this game. He has a rival called Akira, who is the son of a highly respected Go master, and has huge potential, huge talent, and so those two are rivals. And for Hikaru, he's kind of new on the scene. He has skills beyond expectation, considering he's a absolute beginner, and so it fosters this rivalry between the two boys. And so it's his kind of struggle to get better and to gain momentum in competition, and to rely on his own skills outside of Sai's, because initially he was playing Go to kind of abate Sai's want to play Go, because he died all too soon, and was left with the regrets of not playing Go as much as he wanted to in life. And so now, it kind of sets Hikaru's life in a new path. And there's an implication that Sai can only be resurrected or called upon or have this chance of possession when confronted with someone with the potential to become a master at Go, to become one of the best players in Go's history. And it's very, very good. Wonderful Shonen Jump series. Like a lot of this kind of manga, I'd say Shihaifu as well, this definitely created an interest within readers on Go. It rejuvenated players, because previously it was definitely seen as like an old person's pastime. Young kids weren't super into learning and playing Go, but after this hit the scene, a lot of people wanted to play Go. It's really, really good. Great characters. It does end a little bit open-endedly, which may not be satisfying for a lot of people, but I think the journey overall is so satisfying. The amount of change that Hikaru goes through over the several years of his life, how he changes from this kind of clueless kid to someone who absolutely loves Go and finds it a very large part of his life, is wonderful. And I would argue that this is where Obata really found his feet as an artist. He really got a lot of experience and practice throughout the serialization of this series, which he then later, of course, continued to improve on throughout his career. But yes, the wonderful series. If you haven't given it a shot, definitely do. It is a little bit unconventional, and even if you don't know a huge amount about Go, like I don't, it's still one that I think is fairly accessible, and it does try to teach you along the way. Finally, for this shelf, we have Astro Lost in Space by Kenta Shinohara. This is the mangaka of Sket Dance, a manga that we do not have in English, but the anime is on Crunchyroll to read and to watch, I should say. This is a 5-volume sci-fi series. You may be familiar with it. It just did get an anime adaptation, which was very good. I haven't finished it, but it is a pretty solid adaptation of this series. And this is a sci-fi about a group of kids who get stranded on a ship without like full navigation systems, and they have to try and get back home to their home planet with just their resources and try to survive. So there's like 8 or 9, maybe 10 kids. It's very reminiscent of Moto Hagio's They Were 11, which is a classic sci-fi series about a similar thing. A group of individuals are locked into or confined to a spaceship and have to survive for a month, and they discover there is an additional mysterious person within the group. These kids, they initially were meant to just be camping and doing like group training on a pretty, non-threatening planet, as per expected and usual for, teens in this sci-fi future. But they are sucked into a wormhole, kind of, and end up just drifting in space just outside of this ship. And when they get onto the ship, they realize that it has been sabotaged, so the navigation systems are gone. And so they realize there's a traitor in their midst, but they don't know who, and they don't want to kind of pit each other against themselves. And so they have to work together to try and get back home, even though there is someone who is actively trying to stop them. And there are a bunch of different kids from a bunch of different backgrounds, a bunch of different personalities, and they all have various secrets in their lives, and they all have something in common as well, which they don't initially realize, but soon becomes very relevant. And so it is a really fun, interesting kind of classic sci-fi story. It has some pretty good twists. It has some fun characters, and although it does play a little bit, especially with this main male character on the front here, that plays to like typical action protagonist tropes, I think they're done very, very well and in a very likable way. I feel like all of these kids, they do feel like they have various motivations and they feel realistic to, although some of them are more optimistic or naive or kind of cynical than others, they all do genuinely care about each other and do want to kind of make it out alive, even if they're not necessarily friends at the beginning. Their time spent together, they do learn to value each other. It's very, very good. I recommend the manga. It's only 5 volumes long. This is one that you can read on the Shonen Jump app, as you can with Hikaru no Go, so you don't necessarily have to buy the series, but this is one that I tried on the Shonen Jump app. I read the entire thing, fell in love with it, and picked it up pretty much immediately because I knew that I would reread it. It's definitely one that surprised me, and I was really glad to have the option to read it legally, digitally, for free initially, and really happy to have it in my collection now. On this next shelf we have Yu Yu Hakusho, the complete series 1 to 19. This is the older of Yoshihiro Togashi's most popular manga. This is a shonen action series about a teenage boy who gets hit by a car and becomes sort of this detective for, or kind of crime fighter for ghosts, and that under the guidance of a Shinigami. And later he is given life once again and stays as his kind of crime fighting self, trying to prevent demons from causing trouble within the human world with the help of various friends whom are both human and demon. I mean, most people know Yu Yu Hakusho. It's a pretty nostalgic series for a lot of people. I really like this series. I like the manga and the anime. They're a little bit different, the endings. And although this is a little less conclusive with the ending compared to the anime, it's still really decent. It's really solid. I think it has some great follow-up stuff to where the anime ended. I just really like Togashi's character writing. There's a lot of really interesting ideas that don't really get a huge amount of time to kind of stretch their wings. You can see a lot of ideas that Togashi would later use in his other manga, most notably Hunter x Hunter. And he has a great way of taking a lot of disparate ideas, a lot of things that are kind of at not the expected type of thing, and playing around with expectations of them. This is more so a kind of standard Shonen Jump action series, but it still has a lot of Togashi flair, and I really respect his work just in general. This is not one that I really need to convince people to try. A lot of people know it, love it, grew up with the anime, etc. And it's one that continues to be very, very good, even rereading it. It's, it's definitely like a 90s series, but it's just a lot of fun and does bring up a lot of questions of, again, responsibility and purpose and good and evil, all that good stuff that Togashi loves to play around with. And great cast of characters. Yusuke and his friends Kuwabara, Hiei, and Kurama are all great. All of the side characters as well are just wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. If you haven't given it a shot, do. And the other thing I have on this shelf is 1 to 26 of Kakaishi. So this is not complete. It's a 35 volume series. It is complete in English. I just haven't finished it personally myself. And this is a shonen action series by Yellow Tanabe, which is really wonderful. It really surprised me in how much I liked this series. Tanabe, she really writes a lot of really powerful, quiet moments between characters, which is something I find shonen lacks a lot of the time. Of course, most people think of like action and adventure when it comes to these types of shonen series. So, but there's very little time for the characters to breathe and reflect and to grow, which is something that I really value in shonen manga when given the chance to do. So Kakaishi is the story of a middle school boy and his neighbor slash friend slash love interest, who is also a Kakaishi. The two of them protect this particular area, which coincidentally is where their school is built upon. And it has been their family's duty to protect this area for generations, where there's a lot of spiritual power. And so they use the powers of Kakaishi, basically borderlines, to prevent spirits from coming into this area, gaining overwhelming power and kind of losing control of themselves, which is a large theme in a lot of the stories here. So yeah, really, really surprisingly good. I feel like this series is criminally underrated, mainly because a lot of people just haven't heard of it, haven't read it themselves, and just aren't really aware of it at all. I think it has pretty bad timing release-wise in English-speaking countries, mainly because it was coming out when a lot of the kind of flagpole shonen series were coming out. Naruto, Bleach, obviously, but also things like Fullmetal Alchemist and other various very popular shonen titles. And this one, I wouldn't say, like, I can't really talk to Naruto or Bleach, but I wouldn't say it's to the level of, like, Fullmetal Alchemist, but it does a lot of really good things. It has a lot of really interesting character moments, a lot of creativity, and you guys know, obviously I've already said it, I have a huge fondness for yokai stories, supernatural stories, things that use Shintoism and Japanese folklore within the story. I really like how this series breaks down gender expectations. Our main character, although he is a Kakaishi, he doesn't really want to be a Kakaishi. His actual dream in life is to open up a patissiere or a bakery and be a cake maker. He loves baking cakes. And that's just like really refreshing to see. And even as the action gets more and more, dire, and even though the situation gets worse and worse, and his responsibilities to this area and to protecting the people he cares about do grow in importance to him and obviously take front stage, and his motivations are very much to protect his family and the people he cares about, he never gives up on his own personal dreams of, having a somewhat normal life, of living as someone who can open a cake store and have people enjoy his cooking. Also, his dad is like a stay-at-home dad, which is really cool. Again, just kind of breaking gender stereotypes. He does have an older brother as well as a younger brother, and his mother is AWOL. She's also a Kakaishi, but she's traveling around and kind of doing her own thing and doesn't come home very often. So it's a really interesting dynamic, and he's being trained along with his brothers. His brother is kind of a high-ranking Kakaishi now, but he is not the head of the family. Our main character is, because he inherited a particular, birthmark that shows him or makes him the head of the family, or the one with the responsibility to protect this particular area. So yes, and then there's been feuds between the two families, the neighbors, and their interpretations on how to protect this area. and how the family rivalry is affecting the childhood friendship that these characters have. It's really good. It has a lot of pretty effective, creepy monsters, some really interesting and fun side characters, and when it wants to get serious, it really does, and it really does kind of capture you in the best of what it does. So yeah, Kakaishi, not one that I think a lot of people have read or watched, because it does have an anime adaptation, but it is very, very good. Certainly a surprise, and I hope to finish it sooner rather than later. On the final shelf of this bookcase, we have My Hero Academia. I don't tend to double stack, but this is really the only spot that I have. I have volumes 1 to 20, which is not up to date with the English releases. But this series I'm reading on the Shonen Jump app, so it's not a huge priority for me to be picking up the volumes. I love this series. It doesn't really need an introduction. It's very creative. I think Horikoshi puts a pretty interesting spin onto the kind of superhero society and superhero high school setting. There's a real feeling of Horikoshi understanding underdogs, and that's why Midoriya does work and is so likable as a protagonist. The hard work that has gone into this series and the imagination and creativity is just really fun. This series doesn't need anyone like me to convince you to read it. It's hugely popular. The anime is hugely popular and very fun, great adaptation. But it's one of, the number one series in Jump right now. I don't need to tell you to read it because you probably already are, or you're probably already watching it. Horikoshi, it does a great job. I think all of his characters have a lot of nuance. I think the utilization and use of a lot of the quirks are really unique and fun and interesting. Sure, our character has super strength, but that doesn't ultimately make him better than a lot of his peers who have various other quirks, other powers. It's how people use them and in what situations they use them that makes them effective. And you can see how his kind of underpowered or lesser powered classmates can still effectively do their job and be heroes in their own way. And I remember when the first season of the anime was coming out, and some people were upset that in the first couple episodes, Midoriya, after being a child who was born without a power, is kind of given this, deus ex machina, like, oh, well, I'm granting you a power, so it doesn't matter, you earn this. And a lot of people, I think, would have preferred or were expecting a story about how he doesn't need superpowers to be just as good as everyone else. He can still be a hero without powers, which is a great message. I mean, that is a very legitimate way to tell this type of story. But I do think that the fact that Midoriya was rewarded with his hard work, with his potential, with his wish and his want, and the idea that if you do work hard enough with the most impossible things, you can achieve them, is also a valuable lesson. He is granted powers or given powers unexpectedly, but that doesn't mean they are any less valid than those of his friends and classmates who were born with those powers, and kind of take them for granted. It's a really, really fun little series. It continues to get better. I really like a lot of the arcs in this story, and each arc does continue to get better and better. The senpai characters in a particular arc are the Big Three arc, or whatever it's called. I really like them. That's currently what's being adapted into the anime. I like the current arc, which is another kind of apprenticeship or internship arc yet again. There's a lot of real love and heart put into this series, and I'm glad that Horikoshi did manage to tell the story that he wanted to. I also really like the Vigilantes spin-off of this series. I know some people like it even more than this series. I wouldn't say that I like it more, but I do think it is a very, very wonderful, relevant, and fun to read spin-off, more so than a lot of other spin-offs or sequels of manga. And although I don't personally own it as of yet, it is another one that I follow on the Shonen Jump app, so I'm not like in a huge hurry to pick up the volumes. It is one that I do encourage people to try, and I'm sure that at some point we will see an anime adaptation of that as well, because I'd be surprised. It seems very popular, and it's shorter, and it's one that I think ties in very well to the franchise as a whole, as a prequel, because it is a prequel to the series. Great series, one of Shonen Jump's current super popular titles, and for good reason. Finally, for this bookcase, and behind My Hero Academia, we have Skip Beat, Volume 1 to 42, which is the most recent, well actually 43, I think just came out. This is probably the longest series in my collection. I think it's the longest series I'll ever have in my collection, because a lot of it's ongoing. It does feel like it's heading towards a conclusion, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's reached its conclusion. So it's very possible that this will be 50, 60 volumes by the end of it. Whereas a lot of the other longer series that I own, things that you'll see later on, don't, they haven't exceeded this threshold volumes yet, and probably aren't planning to get to the same length as Skip Beat. In general, I don't actually collect a huge amount of titles, as you may have already noticed, that do tend to run very, very long. Generally like 25 volumes, 30 volumes is where I cap out. There are exceptions to that, and this being one of them, the biggest one of them. But again, most of them don't go on for too much longer after that point. But Skip Beat is a shoujo rom-com, mainly comedy, about a teenage girl who, after having her heart broken by her childhood sweetheart, who is a popular singer, idol type of personality, he's kind of a rock star dude. She realizes that she's being taken advantage of by him. She swears her revenge and decides that she's going to get way more popular than him and ruin his career, break his heart, and get her revenge that way, because he kind of regards her as this like plain Jane, nothing, stupid, country girl with no aspirations. And she's like, screw you, I'm gonna beat you at your own game. And so she does. She joins a rival group, a rival talent agency, and starts on her hard work at becoming a famous talento. So, just kind of a famous person. Not really specializing in like music or acting or anything like that, more so a TV personality, but she does discover that she does have a natural affinity for acting, and she soon grows close to the like number one hottest guy, like voted for 5 years in a row or whatever, who previously she really didn't like. He was kind of the main rival that her ex-boyfriend had, so she didn't really like this guy, but she's growing closer to him, and over the course of their friendship and kind of proximity, working under the same group, under the same talent agency. In addition to this, she isn't actually initially taken in as a prospective talent by this agency, because they don't believe that she can properly express love. And because she's had her heart broken, she kind of agrees, like, oh yeah, I hate love, I'm never going to love again, or whatever, which is under the expectation of the president of this talent agency. He's like, no, you can't hate love. You have to be able to love like all of your fans and your audience and whatever else. And so she's put into a newly established class or group called the Love Me group. And so she's kind of like a gopher. She has to or an intern, she has to do all this hard labor and try to impress the people around her and get them to like her. And then the more she does that, the better kind of job she can do. It's very fun. It's very funny. This one, again, is, I would say, a shoujo for people who aren't super fans of the demographic or just don't have a huge amount of interest in the genre. This one is very likable. I think if you give it a shot, if it doesn't pull you in immediately, I'd be surprised. The anime is also really funny, although criminally incomplete. It's very open-ended and only adapts the first, 10-ish volumes. I don't remember. Not a huge amount of the manga. And this is a long manga. As you can tell, I've got 42 out of the current 45 volumes. It is ongoing with no end in sight. But it is one that just gets better and better and better. It's funny. It's fun. Kyoko is our main character. She's very relatable. And I think it's nice to have a series that does focus on self-improvement first and foremost. And then kind of that romance aspect. And yeah, I mean, it's one that I have found that majority of people who've tried it enjoyed it. And for me, when I first ran into it, I became aware of it through the Kickstarter for the anime, to get that on Blu-ray and in English and whatever else. I watched the series before I pledged to it, fell in love. At the same time, a local publisher was having a huge sale on Viz titles or manga just in general because they were kind of liquidating all of their stock. They were changing up distribution channels and things like that. And so I was able to buy the first 36 volumes, which was all that was out at the time, and for a very good price. And I absolutely read through all of them in probably 3 days. And it is a little bit of a slower release because we are caught up pretty much to Japan. But it's always so funny and well worth it. And as I said, I'm not a huge fan of long-running series, but this one is the exception to the rule, and it's very wonderful. And I could not encourage you enough to read it. At the top of this next shelf, which is a skinny little shelf, we have my Nyanko-sensei plush, who is the, I guess, mascot character, one of the main characters of Natsume's Book of Friends, the series I absolutely adore. Again, not a surprise if you've watched my videos before. And he has a little snow bunny on his head, which is a pretty iconic episode of one of the earliest seasons. I love Nyanko-sensei. Good cat. Good character, good mascot, and he has a bajillion different iterations of plush versions, so yeah, really happy to have my own. That was a gift from one of my best friends, and he just kind of watches over everything from his perch there. First of the manga in this first shelf, we have 1 to 4, the complete series of Fumi Yoshinaga's Flower of Life, one of my absolute favorite series from her. This is a phenomenal series. I really, really love it. I think it really showcases the best of Yoshinaga's writing. It even, in fact, has a particular trope that I dislike, which is a student-teacher relationship. And yet, somehow she makes it work because she does not glorify it. She doesn't use it as a good thing. She actually showcases how harmful that mentally can be for individuals. It's really, really good. I love it. It highlights all of her points that she makes on the particular characters and their decisions in the series. And this is a story about, it's kind of a collected story about various teenagers in high school, but our main character here, the one smiling, he is a recent addition to the school. He's starting off a little bit later than all of his classmates, and they kind of don't have a super great first impression of him because he dyed his hair super light and he seems kind of boisterous and kind of dumb. But he introduces himself and he's like, oh yeah, because he's starting probably a month or so later than the rest of the kids, and like, oh, maybe he got kicked out of his old school, he's a troublemaker, blah, blah, blah. But he's like, oh yeah, I'm, so-and-so. And as for why I'm starting school later than everyone else, well, I had leukemia. And everyone's like, oh my God, I'm so, like, they don't know how to react. Obviously, they kind of made assumptions. It's like, oh shit, this kid, like, he's gone through some shit. And they're all like, they don't know how to react. They don't want to say anything. They kind of want to apologize. And he's like, oh, don't worry about it. I got better. Like, I'm fine now. So it's about him and him starting high school. He's actually a year older than all of his classmates because he had leukemia. He was in the hospital for a year, so he was held back. And it's his high school debut, and his friendship with all of his classmates and the various people that he surrounds himself with. He and his best friend are wonderful, really great little pair, and you can really understand their dynamic. He has a very close relationship with his family. His mother's working overseas, and his dad is rarely home, so he's very close with his older sister, who she's going through her own kind of struggles. She's currently kind of a shut-in. She doesn't work. She doesn't have any, like, she's not in school. She doesn't have a job. She doesn't really have any friends either. She kind of stays home and looks after the house, does the chores, things like that. And then obviously all of his classmates, and in particular one classmate who's kind of big asshole, thinks he's better than everyone else, and he's kind of not very liked amongst his peers. And so the manga, the story is about their first year in high school, the various character drama interactions that go on throughout the school year, and it is phenomenal. Yoshinaga, always amazing, and this series in particular is wonderful, although I will say that Volume 4 is impossible to find. I was very lucky in that I did find a very cheap-ish copy, or at least affordable copy, when I was initially collecting this series, but they were printed in very small numbers, so it's hard to find. It's a fairly rare little book, and so you can read it with just the first 3 volumes, but I do think that the 4th volume kind of gives a resolution to everything, so it is a shame that we don't have the entirety available in English. Easy to recommend, but it is, you should give it a try regardless. Next is another 4-volume Yoshinaga series. This is Antique Bakery. This is probably one more people are familiar with because this is the only of Yoshinaga's titles that has gotten an anime adaptation, which is a great adaptation as well, by the way. But this is the story of a guy in his early 30s who decides to open a patissiere, a bakery, to serve cakes in order to track down and stop his childhood kidnapper. It is very funny. With him, his kind of business partner and the actual chef or patissiere is a young guy, baker, who he actually knows from high school, because this baker confessed his feelings to him, his love, and he was thoroughly rejected. He rejected him absolutely in kind of a really terrible, assholey way, like, oh, fuck off, homo, pretty much. And he's felt guilty about that ever since. But unbeknownst to him, because they didn't really stay in touch after that, this other man has become very popular in the Nichome area, is kind of regarded as sort of a devilish gay. His powers of seduction, or his attitude, his personality, turns every man around him gay. They want to be in a relationship with him. So it's like there's problems with it, but it's really funny. And the great thing about Yoshinaga is, even though there may be problematic elements, they're always handled in a really funny, self-aware way that it doesn't feel like it's actively hurtful or harmful, if that makes sense. Rounding out our main cast, we have this character in the middle who is an ex-boxer, ex-punk, who becomes our baker's apprentice. He has a real love for sweets and a real sensitivity to sweets. He has a really sensitive tongue, so after he discovers that he's no longer able to box, he begs the two men to let him join the shop and become a patissier himself. And finally rounding out kind of our main cast, we also have a childhood friend of our main character, who is also kind of a servant type individual, because our main character comes from a very wealthy family, who has been his friend and confidant for years and years and years, and his support system as well. Who is a very sweet, genuine, wholehearted, kind guy, dumb as a bag of rocks, and later on in the series does become very attached to our baker, and thus their relationship grows from there. It's really funny. It's sort of the day-to-day lives of these four men as they run a bakery in the suburbs of Tokyo, and it is absolutely perfected Yoshinaga's humor. I mean, there's so many things like, why did you ever think this plan would work? But you don't really question it, because you're like, well, that sounds like some bullshit these characters would try to do anyway. Needless to say, obviously I've already gushed enough about Yoshinaga. I love her work, and this is one that I think more people are familiar with. Another one that's out of print. Both the previous series, and the next one I'm going to be talking about were all put out by DMP, or Digital Manga Publishing. So they're all out of print, but this one I think is easier to find, especially compared to Flower of Life Volume 4. A lot of DMP's Yoshinaga titles are pretty easy to pick up, so they're not... I mean, some of these can be expensive, but then if you wait a little bit, you can usually find them for a decentish price. Also, interestingly, with these covers of this release, there's actually like scratch and sniff elements to them. At this age, I don't think they will work particularly well anymore, but that's a little bit of a unique trait that these particular releases had. Finally, for the shelf, we have Garden Dreams, which is a single volume by Yoshinaga of a man and sort of his relationships and kind of tragic loves, and the relationship he has with some other people in his life. It's heartbreaking, it's beautiful, it's really effective. I think the great thing about Yoshinaga, that fell, but I'm not going to fix it. The great thing about Yoshinaga is just how quickly, in all of her series, she can have you laughing in one panel and then absolutely sobbing in the next. She is a master at expression. Her art style isn't super duper detailed or super duper cluttered. It doesn't have necessarily a huge amount of stuff going on, but the amount of what she can say in a single look, in a single character expression, is beyond compare. It's just absolute mastery of expressions and of character language, body language, and not needing dialogue to tell the story. It's phenomenal. I love it. I love her, as you can tell. And this is not all of the Yoshinaga titles, but this is probably the end of her most well-known titles. We do have a couple more one-shots, and then you will see some of her BL as well within the collection, because I own every single one of her titles that have been released in English, which is all of them, except for one, unfortunately. On this next shelf, we have a mix of limited edition movie releases. A couple are from the UK, others are from Japan with English subtitles, and others are US releases. The first being Lu Over the Wall, which is a kind of mermaid story from Yuasa, who you may know from Devilman Crybaby, who you may know from Ping Pong, Tatami Galaxy, etc. It's certainly a more family-friendly story than he's used to, but it's very fun, very clever, creative. Next to that is The Silent Voice, the film adaptation of the manga of the same name. Really strong. I think it adapts the best parts of the manga and streamlines it. It captures a lot of the atmosphere and is a pretty decent adaptation. I actually prefer it to the manga, which is very good in of itself, but not my favorite thing. And of course, Kyoto Animation did a phenomenal job. I really honestly love, in general, Kyoto Animation's films more than their television series. I think they're able to capture such powerful emotional stories in an hour and a half or 2 hours, even more effectively than in full 12 or 26 episode, anime series. Next to that is Dokyusei, or the film adaptation of the first volume of Classmates, which is a BL story. It is by Asumi Nakamura, a BL that I absolutely adore, and personally still probably the best BL anime adaptation that we have gotten. Some of the more recent ones have been a lot better than others that we've had previously, and I do look forward to more BL getting good adaptations, or I guess more BL that I enjoy and don't have problems with getting adaptations. And Dokyusei is really a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful film. Absolutely phenomenal. It's beautifully animated. It captures Nakamura's character designs superbly, and I highly recommend it. Although it is pricey, it's an Aniplex release. It's like $60 for the set, and it is only an hour-long film, so maybe not worth it for everyone, but if you save up and if you love the series, then highly recommended. Next to that is In This Corner of the World, which is another manga adaptation. It is, again, very, very effective. I think it's honestly the better way to experience this series or this story. And this is about a young woman and her life, her early years of marriage during the final year of the war, living as a citizen of Hiroshima. It is powerful, beautiful. I think it captures a lot of the emotionality without a lot of the grim hopelessness of Grave of the Fireflies. It obviously has a real human look into the struggles of wartime and post-war Japan. It's beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. And obviously, being based in Hiroshima, or right next to Hiroshima, obviously has a very direct effect onto how the war ended. Next to that is the Japanese limited edition release of Melody of the Heart, or Anthem of the Heart, either one. That's been translated into both. This is the story of a school club, I think? No. A bunch of kids in the same classmates who kind of get pulled together to do a performance for their class or for the school for something. It's kind of a punishment. I don't really remember. It's been a while since I saw this film, but I really, really loved it. They do a musical, and One of the characters is kind of a composer, musician. He's really into it. And then, of course, we have all the dramas of like interpersonal relationships with these characters. This is a Mari Okada film. She wrote this one. It's the staff of Anohana. A lot of them went on to do this film. I think it's more effective than Anohana. I think this is a more effective story than a lot of Okada's works. I've said this before. Again, if you're used to my channel, you know that I have a love-hate relationship with Okada. She can write some amazing stuff. She can write some pretty middling, like okay stuff, and then she can write some absolute terrible stuff. And this, thankfully, is one of the better ones. I do really enjoy it. I would recommend it. And it's beautiful. It really reminds me of kind of the bittersweetness of high school. And I really liked the ending, how it resolved itself as well. Next to that is the OVAs and the film versions of Time of Eve, which the film is basically the OVAs stitched together and then a couple extra minutes of footage interspliced as well, just to tie it all together. This is a near future sci-fi about society if androids were around, the realities of that and how people would interact with AI and how AI or like androids would fit into our lives. It's wonderful. This was another one, like Kickstarter release. The film release of at least the OVA release did get a wider initial release and is subtitled only. I believe the film is dubbed as well as subtitled. Really, 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 really enjoy this series. I think it's available to watch on Crunchyroll, so you don't necessarily have to buy it to watch it. But if you like kind of near future sci-fi, like I do, if you like robotics notes kind of sci-fi, where it's not too far in the future, but just far enough in the future where like technological advances have changed so much that we do have to question their role in our lives and how we interact with them, then check this one out. I'm not always a huge fan of like super duper like, oh yes, we're traveling through space and that kind of sci-fi. This is the kind of sci-fi that I enjoy first and foremost, and Time of Eve really is very deserving of all of the love that it continues to get. Next shelf is just a display shelf. You can see we have a Level E Blu-ray DVD limited edition set. We actually own two of these sets, one that I own and one that my sister owns. And then this is Prince Baka, the main character of this series. This is another Togashi series. It's a 3-volume anime that we never got in English, but we did get this anime version available, obviously, from Funimation. Very funny, kind of goofy sci-fi. There's problems with it. There's definite problems with it. And I won't say that everything works, but again, there's a lot that I really like for this series. And the problematic is pretty problematic. One particular arc of episodes is what I think of, but overall, it's very funny. It's very witty. I think it ties itself together pretty well. And Prince Baka is the universe's greatest troll. It's a pretty, like, it's not a super duper must-watch type of series, but I enjoyed enough for what it is. So yeah. On the next shelf is really just a bunch of one-shots. The first being All My Darling Daughters, another Fumi Yoshinaga title. This one I think was nominated for an Eisner. Really, really wonderful. This is a collection of stories from various women's lives and their perspectives on the people in their lives, their relationships. It's just classic Yoshinaga. Really beautiful, really wonderful. And I think this one's really the easier of her works to recommend because it is only 1 volume. I believe Viz released this, so it's pretty easy to get. It's not out of print or anything. And it gives a pretty good taste of her just general writing style and her character interactions. So check it out. Next is another Yoshinaga title, which is Not Love, But Delicious Foods Make Me So Happy, put out by Impress. This is her autobiographical manga, or semi-autobiographical manga, which is basically her going around to various restaurants and commenting on the food, which is quintessential classic Yoshinaga if you have read any of her works. Very in character for her, and you see her kind of personality shine through, how she interacts with her friends, and how she kind of values food in her own life, and it gives a great insight to a creator who I love and who a lot of people love. It isn't like, if you're not a fan of her, then this may just seem like, oh, this is just a bunch of reviews for restaurants that I'm never going to go to because I don't live in Tokyo. But I don't think you read enough Yoshinaga if that's all you take away from it. But also, I mean, these are all real restaurants. It was published in an actual foodie magazine in Japan. So if you are in Japan and you're wanting some good places to eat and some restaurant recommendations, you wouldn't go astray picking up this and reading this book. So good value. Next is the single volume My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness by Nagata Kabi, which is a phenomenal memoir manga about Kabi's struggle with her depression, her various mental illness, her physical ailments and chronic ailments, and her search for acceptance, her search to try and find love through all of her issues, her struggle with her sexuality. Obviously, she is a lesbian, so she has interest in other women. But this really isn't a story about her lesbianism specifically. I mean, it does play an aspect into the story, but this really is more so a look at her perception of herself and how her mental illness affects herself and her family, and how the perception of her family has changed over the years, growing older, and with this and with the next series I'm talking about, I really hope that Kabi really gets the help she needs. She really is going through a lot, and she really needs a support system that, especially in this book, she doesn't feel she has. And from what I have heard of her most current manga, I don't necessarily think she's been getting recently either. This is one that a lot of people encourage people to read, and I also strongly back that. I do think it's a must read if you like very intimate, dark memoir type stories, but I will preface that by saying this does not shy away from the very, very self-destructive habits that Kabi puts onto herself, her struggle, as I said, with her mental health, struggle with self-harm, struggle with alcoholism. So it's not an easy read. And if those are issues that you yourself struggle with or that are triggering to you, I can't say that you have to read this, because I don't think you need to for your own mental health and well-being. It is very powerful though, and I really, really hope that Kabi gets the help that she needs, gets the support that she needs. Following My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness is My Solo Exchange Diary, which is the sequel, again by Nagata Kabi, and this one is an even more, it's 2 volumes completed. It really delves into her re-examining herself and her situation after having published My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness. So this really is also a memoir, but it's interesting to see a follow-up memoir kind of criticize the things that she was saying in the first volume, in how her relationship with her family works, with how her parents interact, with how the relationship with her mother and her dad works, is really interesting to see. And it's nice to see that her perception of things changed along the way, and how she saw her own role in the family change. But again, this very, very, very heavy subject matter. In this one, she was actually hospitalized twice, I believe, for mental health reasons, self-harm, alcoholism, and just not looking after herself. And she physically, she suffers with eating disorders. She suffers with, she pulls her hair out in nervous fits. She just doesn't, she's not in a good place. And even after going through hospitalization twice, she's not in necessarily a good headspace. She does have hope for the future, but it's not ultimately like, oh yeah, I went to the hospital and they fixed me and everything's better. I'm happily ever after. Again, like I said with Lesbian Experience with Loneliness, Kabi is a creator that I really hope gets the help she needs, because she does need help. And it's not every day that we get such a truthful look at mental health, especially within Japanese media, because Japan doesn't value mental health as much, or the perception is that they don't value mental health as much as other places. If you need help with your mental health, then is kind of perceived as a failing on your part, which of course is not the case. So it's nice to see the Japanese perspective on this, but again, if any of these issues are triggering to you, it's not a must read. It is very painful to get through, very hard to get through, and very confronting. So I do think if you're a fan of very raw, emotional, true memoir, then pick it up. Otherwise, give it a miss. Next is Seven Seas' release of Claudine by Ryoko Ikeda. As of now, still the only Ikeda manga that we have in English, although hopefully very, very soon Rose of Versailles will be in my hands and then be in the collection. But for those not familiar, this is the story of a transgender man called Claudine in historical France, and his challenges, his personal drama and relationships. It is a tragedy. It is not a happy story. I think like all 70s shoujo manga, it's overwrought and melodramatic, and there's problems with it, I think, which are kind of self-reflective of the ideas of gender of the time, as well as the time as when it was printed. But it is a pretty interesting insight in how transgenderism was perceived. And Ikeda's a great storyteller. It's super duper short, so it's a super skinny book, but well worth the read. If you like 70s shoujo manga, pick it up. If you like gender focused manga, pick it up. It's not perfect, but it certainly is an interesting perspective and an interesting fictionalization of something that I think some people regard as like a modern phenomena, being transgenderism. Obviously it's not, but people. Claudine, beautiful book, really happy to have it, and really happy that Seven Seas has expanded so much with their LGBT line over the last couple years. Another transgender manga with The Bride Was a Boy. This is written and drawn by Chi, who is a transgender woman. And if the book didn't want to fall, this is a autobiography, educational manga about Chi's personal transition, physical transition, and changing her gender on her birth certificate in order to be able to marry her fiancé, who is a cisgender man who is well aware that she is a transgender woman. And it really gives an insight to a lot of the LGBT issues in Japan. It is also quite self-aware with her own experience being fairly unique in that she had a very supportive family and supportive group of friends. And so she didn't have a huge amount of conflict when she decided to transition. The fact that she is wanting to marry a cisgender man, while she is transitioning to a woman, makes it easier for her to get married compared to a lot of her gay friends or other trans friends who are already married and feel that they can't, transition, because then their marriage is no longer seen as valid within Japanese law. There's a lot of issues there. It is very educational, but it's very cute, very sweet, and I really hope that she and her husband have a happily ever after, because they seem like such a sweet couple, and their wedding day, when she was writing about it, just seemed so lovely, so sweet, and I'm just really happy for them. And I really like this particular book, especially compared to Claudine, which is, as I said, kind of a tragedy, melodramatic, over the top. This one is kind of the complete opposite, and I think for young people, whether they're transgender or not, but I think it's nice to have a story that has, especially a memoir, that has a happy ending for our transgender character. She's very happy in her life. She has a loving partner who's completely supportive of her, and her life, she had difficult periods, but there's always hope for the future. And I think that's a really important message for all teens, but especially teens and young people who are closeted transgender, or they are afraid of transitioning. They might not have the support of their friends and family in their current situation, but hope for the future and making the decision. There's only good things can come. I mean, it is such a difficult issue, but I think it's really important that there is a positive portrayal and a positive story that can be shared with people like Cheese and like Chi and her husbands. It's really, really, really good, and I highly recommend it to people who like, again, LGBT manga, memoir manga, those who are interested in kind of queer studies and issues in Japan, especially because obviously it's a very Japanese perspective. Really great, love it, and really cute art style as well. She's a really adorable artist. Next is another collection of one-shots. This is Town of Evening Calm, Country of Cherry Blossoms by Fumio Kono, who is the mangaka of In This Corner of the World. This is more post-war, post-Hiroshima stories, collection of stories that explores mainly those who were affected by the Hiroshima bombing in the years and the decades afterwards. Kind of the pervasive sickness, radiation sickness that affected hundreds of thousands of people, and then also the societal prejudice of wider Japanese society against survivors, which is horrible to think about, even generationally. Grandkids are still worrying about this kind of perceived uncleanness because their family, their ancestors, their grandparents or parents were victims in this horrific period of war. So again, very effective wartime stories. I think Kono really has an affinity for the Hiroshima area and depicting the people of this particular time and place. And it's a short little book. This is put out by Last Gasp. It is also out of print, I believe, but it is really well worth hunting down if you can find it. Really, really beautiful, and really happy that I was able to find a copy. Next is a single volume Pink by Kyoko Okazaki. This is a quirky josei series looking at the consumerism of the 80s in Japan when the economic bubble was at its height and young people were kind of just focused on spending and living in the lap of luxury and not really caring about the future. And so we have our main character who She is escort, basically, a prostitute. She has a pet crocodile, in which she feeds, and then her relationship with a young man who's kind of her complete opposite, and how consumerism literally consumes us all. It's very good. It's not my favorite of Okazaki's works. The metaphor is probably very unsubtle and pretty obvious. And it is, like, I don't necessarily think people, young readers especially, may understand it now, because it is very of its time, of that particular era of Japanese society, but it's still very relevant. Sure, it captures the economic bubble of Japan, but consumer society has not slowed down, and the mindset of young people who live within it, especially of certain classes, has not changed all too much. And it's interesting to see how relevant something which is very specific to a period can still be in this common day. The other Kyoko Okazaki book is Helter Skelter, Fashion Unfriendly. For those not familiar, this is about a pop star, or like an idol model, who is deathly afraid of becoming irrelevant as time goes on and as she gets older, and so she continually literally recreates herself through plastic surgery, through drug use, etc., kind of living the rock star lifestyle, and kind of the repercussions of this is a very critical look at, again, kind of pop culture and being within, like being a star, the throwaway nature of talent and of people within the entertainment industry, the expectations, especially on women within the entertainment industry, on staying beautiful and young and perfect, and just how the whole system is really rotting from the inside. The just unbelievable expectations of the mass populace and of the media on these people, and also the impact of this media on just us normal people. It's very, very wonderful, kind of creepy and out there. And again, none of the characters are good people, like in Pink as well, I didn't mention, but that's pretty obvious thing. But it is very, very, very good and well worth the read. Finally, for this shelf, we have Miyoko Ano's enclosed called Fat, which is about an office worker who is initially overweight. She is cheated on by her boyfriend, and in revenge, she decides to lose a ton of weight and believes in doing so she will be happy. Unfortunately, she later realizes that is not the case, and although her life does get better and the way people see her does change, she realizes she's not actually that much more fulfilled compared to when she was heavier and when she was, her original self, as it were. And also how, the reason people may have treated her certain ways might not have been because of her weight. It might have been because of her personality, which is not something so easily changed. This is a series I really love. I think Miyoko Ano does a great job of capturing the unrealistic expectations and the toxic relationship that many, if not every, woman has with self-image. It is a hard book to read if you like, I would say, pretty much every woman in the world who has ever existed has had, or a person. I mean, it's not just a gender thing, but of course it is mainly a female-centered issue of body image and self-image. And if you have had struggles with eating disorders, whether that be like anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating, whatever, anywhere on the scale. It draws out a lot of those feelings. I think most women, even if you never suffered from very obvious disordered eating, I think the message of weight and its relationship with happiness and self-worth is one that most, if not everyone, can relate to. Again, like with previous series that I've talked about, like My Soul Exchange Diary, if that is a triggering issue for you, it is, it's very prolific, and, be aware of that. But I love Anno's work. I think she perfectly encapsulates a lot of the hopelessness and societal criticism that is so good in josei series, and this one just is very, very powerful, despite it being kind of hard to read and watch and look at. Really nice to have this, and I'm hoping that we do see more of Anno's work available. She does have some stuff available, but some of it's out of print, some of it's hard to find, and I'm hoping that we see more soon, especially Sugar Sugar Rune. Once Udon has started Rose of Versailles, maybe we might get an inkling of that re-release sometime in this next decade. On the next shelf, we have some movies. We have the first 3 Rebuild Evangelion films. Obviously just the newer iterations of this franchise. Kind of takes it in a different direction. I really like all 3 of them, including the last one. I'm hoping that we see 3.33 plus 1.11, or the 4th and final film, is slated to come out next year, this year, next year. Here's hoping that happens, because it's been a decade since the last one, I'm fairly certain. Yeah, whenever we get to it, that'd be good. Next to that is the Tiger and Bunny films. These are the UK releases. So The Beginning, which is kind of a recap film, and then The Rising, which is kind of a side story sequel movie. Both really good, and The Rising surprisingly so. I like Tiger and Bunny. I think it's a fun idea. Again, like an interesting take on superheroes and superheroism, similar to My Hero Academia, but in a more adult setting, and the realities of what society would be if people had superpowers, or if some people had superpowers. Not nearly as many people have superpowers in Tiger and Bunny compared to My Hero Academia. But The Rising in particular has a really interesting, it is mainly a focused character piece on a side character, Crimson Flame. I don't remember their hero name. The fire one. Nathan someone, I don't remember their hero name, as I said. And in the show itself, I think there's a tendency to kind of dismiss his character as kind of a very flamboyant queen type, gay character, and kind of played for comedy or whatever. But this is quite nuanced into the look of their gender struggle and their past and their relationship with themselves and the people around them. It's really good. It's really, really good. And Tiger and Bunny is a fantastic franchise anyway. I'm just putting that out there. But that film really surprised me in how effective it was. I almost like it more than the TV show, and I like the TV show a lot. Next to that are 3 of Satoshi Kon's films. I think they're in alphabetical order. They're definitely not in release order. And it has space for his 4th film, Millennium Actress, which is actually my favorite of his films and is getting a Blu-ray release. Hopefully, I think it comes out this month, in next week. So I'll be buying it, obviously. Not immediately, but I'm sure I'll get around to it. Really, of course, like Satoshi Kon, I don't, again, need to really convince people to try his work because he is a master, and it is such a shame that he died so young and with work unfinished. I do hope that we see Paranoia Agent on Blu-ray someday, one day. Yeah, I mean, all three of these films are marvelous. Paprika is very obviously about dreams. A lot of people compare or say that Inception ripped it off, which kind of did. Perfect Blue is about the idol industry and is a absolutely compelling thriller. And then Tokyo Godfathers, best Christmas movie ever. Really, really a lot of heart and a lot of love for a group within society that doesn't get a lot of respect, which is the homeless. It's just funny. It's just really funny. So yeah, all three really great films, very different films, and really looking forward to finally getting Millennium Actress on Blu-ray. Next is another shelf just full of one-shots, the first one being Love Song. This is a super duper old Viz release from the 90s. And as you can tell, maybe, it's actually flipped. These are for various books or short stories from Keiko Nishi, all of varying quality, and it was kind of the first push for shoujo manga to be released as like a girls comic and easy to be read by everybody back when manga really wasn't a thing, when wasn't super duper popular like it is now. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good collection. There's some very interesting stories here. Generally romance stories, but there's some interesting sci-fi things in here as well. So, you know, bit of a mixed bag, and it's super duper out of print. I don't know how easy it is to find, though, compared to the next one. Probably easier to find, but I'm not, like, you don't have to go out and find it. It's not a must-have unless you're super duper into, like, 80s, 90s shoujo. Next is another super duper old Viz graphic novel release. Again, before manga was like manga, quote unquote, flipped release. And this one is impossible to find, mainly because it was not technically allowed to be printed. The Japanese publisher never actually signed off on this, so Viz did a no-no and just kind of did it, published it anyway. This is a collection of 4 different stories. Again, shoujo stories is in the title. Look at it. It's not just girl stuff anymore. But we have 2 Keiko Nishi titles, Promise and Since You've Been Gone, which obviously is the same mangaka as that previous book. We have Shio Sato's The Changeling, which is an interesting sci-fi. And then we have the reason I bought this book, the reason I would encourage people to hunt this book down despite it being impossible to find and kind of illegal, is They Were 11 by Moto Hagio, which I mentioned with this series over here. Astro Lust in Space is a classic sci-fi story, whodunit type of thriller. Marvelous. It's kind of a super duper shame that we haven't had a more recent release of such a classic title, especially considering how, for a classic shoujo mangaka, how, like, beloved Moto Hagio is, that one of her most well-known stories isn't readily available in English. It's just kind of shocking. Absolutely love it. This is another interesting collection of stories. Again, with They Were 11 and The Changeling, it is more of a sci-fi twist compared to Nishi's, which are more kind of personal drama, human, kind of down-to-earth. Well, I mean, melodramatic, but there's not really a sci-fi element to it. It's more just love and relationships. Another flipped Viz release, super duper old graphic novel, AA Prime by Moto Hagio. This is a collection of sci-fi stories from her. And again, really great, interesting stuff. Some of the problems that her earlier works did, especially had, or with gender stuff, are kind of fixed. Or she definitely improved and became more well-informed on topics as she went along in her career. There's some really interesting speculative, sci-fi stuff here. And, yeah, I really love it. A Prime is just one of the stories in this collection, and it does kind of follow various different settings and scenes and characters. And I don't think it's, again, it's not easy to find this book, but it's not impossible to find this book. And if you are a Hagia fan, then I would encourage you to try and track it down in one way or another, but it's not going to be an easy task. Next is a much more recent release. This is Little Miss P by Ken Koyama, a kind of comedy commiserating story about the anthropomorphication of a women's menstruation or period. And Little Miss P travels around and visits various individuals of whom have periods and kind of affect their lives. And there's a pretty interesting relationship that Little Miss P has with some of the other individuals in other people's lives, and it's an interesting little book. If you're an individual who struggles with menstruation like I do, if you're an ovary owning person, then I think some of this will be very funny and relatable to you. It's not a book for everyone, of course, but sometimes it's nice to just have the acknowledgement of, life can be kind of hard every month at a certain period. And, sometimes Little Miss P visiting is the worst thing that can ever happen to you. Sometimes it's the best thing that can ever happen to you. There's a lot of different emotions throughout an individual's life in relation to menstruation. And, I think quite a few scenarios get covered in this little book, and it is only the single volume, so it does a pretty good job at kind of covering the spectrum of expectation. Next is An Invitation from a Crab by Panpania. This is the first of Denpa's books that I picked up, and it is a story about, it's kind of just I guess travelogue-esque type of story about our main character just wandering around their neighborhood and interacting with the world. This is kind of the indiest of indie alternate type of manga. Again, not for everyone, but really intriguing. There's a lot to unpack here. It does say a lot about society, if in a somewhat bizarre way. It's not exactly incomprehensible. In fact, it's a little bit obvious. But this book actually, I believe, has been put on reading lists for certain university courses. So there's a lot to be gained from this book. And that might not convince a lot of people to read it, because it's not really a sit down and you're going to have a cool action plot line. And it's very obvious as to character relationships, and there's a lot to get super invested into compared to a more standard manga, but there's a lot of value, and I'm really looking forward to the new Panpania book that Denpa is going to be putting out next year. The other Denpa book that I own is Maiden Railways by Asumiko Nakamura, a mangaka I've already mentioned before with Dokyusei or Classmates. This is a collection of short love stories, some of them yuri, others just general love stories, and various types of love, romantic, familial, and just kind of passion for various hobbies. It's really, really good. Nakamura is, again, a phenomenal mangaka. Love her style, love her work. And there's a lot of different emotions that are portrayed in this manga, a lot of different atmospheres and feelings, but it's tied up really, really well. It all happens within one particular train line, and all of these interpersonal relationships that these train goers feel and encounter. Yeah, really, really wonderful. I'm hoping to see, again, more of Nakamura's work available in English. We do have some of her stuff already. I'm hoping for more because I am greedy. But I do hope that this type of content, these types of books do well for Denpa, because these are the kind that I love from Denpa, and I hope to see more of them get licensed. Next is What is Obscenity? The Story of a Good-for-Nothing Artist and Her Pussy by Roku Denashiko. This is another memoir manga about Roku Denashiko's time fighting obscenity law and being imprisoned for breaking obscenity law. If you're not familiar with this whole thing, back in 2014, maybe a little bit earlier, Roku Denashiko is a very famous and somewhat popular artist in Japan, who is well known for her Devilman, which is her artwork, and that stands for Deko Manko, or decorative manko, or decorative pussy art, which is basically she makes molds of her and other women's vagina or labia, more specifically, and decorates them and makes it into something kind of like fun and quirky and weird. If you know anything about Japan, though, there are particular obscenity laws that prohibit the distribution of images of genitalia, and even like pubic hair can be an issue. That's why a lot within Japan, hentai and just general pornography is censored. And so Roku Denashiko, she got in trouble because she crowdfunded the construction of a kayak that was in the shape of her manko, in the shape of her pussy. And one of the rewards was the 3D, like the digital file of her 3D modeling, so that backers could use it for their own needs, whatever they wanted to do with it, whatever, like create their own kind of artwork. And she didn't think it was like a real issue. It's just kind of fun, even if you don't agree with the kind of artwork. It's not your thing. It's not anything to really get, upset over. But she was seen as breaking obscenity laws because she was distributing genitalia, which she found absolutely absurd, because in Japan there are many certain things where male genitalia, i.e. the penis, generally the penis, is not seen as obscene. There are various fertility kind of festivals where there are huge penis-shaped, totems and things like that don't even get questioned. And she's like, well, why is that not obscene, but this is? Like, I'm not trying to make it pornographic or anything. It's not like I'm showing it to children and like showing them sex or anything. This is just me and a bunch of women like having fun, kind of taking the mickey out of our genitals. So there was a huge backlash internationally that she was imprisoned, found guilty for this. She was in prison for a week the first time, was released, but then later was imprisoned again for a little bit longer, maybe a month or so. And it is a continuous issue with her, and it does call into question, what is obscenity? Like, just merely the fact that genitals exist obscene? What makes female genitals more obscene than males? Why is this thing that is primarily artwork and not an erotic sort of artwork being punished for under like pornographic distribution laws? Which, again, even if you're not into this art, even if you're not like if you think it's weird and gross and you don't personally support, like, it's not something you'd buy, it's not something you really think needs to exist, it's still a conversation that needs to be had because it is a double standard. It is really, really important, and it is like a really important talking point. So this is a book for people who are interested in that case, people who are interested in feminism and these kinds of discussions within Japan. Rokude Nashiko has become kind of the face of this type of discussion, and she's grown hugely popular internationally. And she just seems kind of like, she's very self-aware. She realizes this is a pretty goofy, stupid situation. Within the series, she talks about how she took great pleasure in making the police read her report in which she said pussy, and so they'd have to repeat it. And she's like, oh, it was so funny watching them getting all uncomfortable. Because really, like, we need to take away the stigma of of female genitalia, because I think, like, people don't have an issue with dick jokes. What about, like, why are pussy jokes so much worse? Why is that like, oh, don't talk about that, that's not correct, that's not what people do, that's inappropriate. It's just, again, it's a double standard, and if you're interested in these kinds of conversations, in these sorts of movements and what's happening in the world, and in art criticism as well, what qualifies as art, check out this book. It's been put out by Koyama Press, and it's expensive for what it is, but this is certainly not a manga that is, angled towards the mass manga reader. It is very specific to a particular group or a particular interest. Finally are the first 2 volumes of Fruits Basket Another by Natsuki Takaya. This is the sequel series. It's a 3-volume series, and the 3rd volume is out. I just do not own it yet. This is the sequel series of Takaya's beloved, massive, mega popular shoujo romance series drama, Fruits Basket. I've said before with this series, I mean, I can understand why this isn't that super duper popular, especially with fans of the original, but I don't find this, I mean, it's not a necessary sequel, but I do think that, considering that the story itself of Fruits Basket wraps up very neatly, it doesn't really need more. The fact that this exists and does actually bring something to the story and to giving it value as to why it exists is very, very good. For those who are not familiar with Fruits Basket, one of the largest themes is about breaking cycles of abuse, and how Toru Honda, our main character, helps the Soma family break out of this, or helps them with this curse that their family has been put under, and how people have treated them because of being affected by this curse. In this series, we now have the Soma family, or the children of those original Soma characters, now helping another outsider. And another book has fallen. But helping another outsider break her own cycle of abuse with her relationship with her mother, and really having the messages and the lessons and the tools that were presented in the first series to help the Somas later being used to help others is such a beautiful message, and just, like, again, cyclical. Abuse is a cyclical pattern, but breaking out of abuse can also be a cyclical pattern. And it's really beautiful to see that, like, yeah, things worked out okay. And now, even after, these people have grown up, they've taught their kids the things that they've learnt, and those kids value those lessons, and they want to help other people who need the help. Like, it's a really wonderful thing. And yeah, of course, it's got like, oh, it's kind of fan servicey. It's like, oh, we see the children of all of these characters who we know and love. And it's totally unnecessary in that sense. But I don't think, considering it's only 3 volumes, I don't think it needs to be a brilliant masterpiece for it to exist. And I think for what it is, it does it very well. And I look forward to reading the 3rd volume. I am expecting it soon, hopefully sometime in this next couple weeks, so I can finish it finally and have Fruits Basket closed in my reading. So on the shelf is Frau and Akiko from Fruits Basket. Robotics Notes. These are 2 of the female protagonists of this series, which is kind of a spin-off sequel to Stonescape. And long-time watchers of this channel will know that although the collection changes in many ways and shapes and forms over the multitude of years that it has existed, these 2 have not. I really do enjoy Robotics Notes. I think it's a lot better than I think some people give it credit for, but it's not like my favorite show. So the fact that these 2 have had pride of place here in the collection for so long is a little bit of a surprise. They are just prize figures, but they're very well done prize figures, and I like these 2 girls. I like these particular little figures of them, and they're great. They're a good little pair, and I mean, I'm sure they will be here ever after for as long as the collection exists. These 2 will exist in this spot within it. Next is more movies. These are DVD only, as you can see, and many of them are have only been released on DVD. First is the Japanese release, and the only release, of Tabimachi Late Show, which is a collection of 4-minute shorts, which was released a couple years ago now. This does have English subtitles on it. And it's just really sweet little stories about, human connection and journeying, traveling. Really, really sweet, cute. Next to that is Brave Story, which is a kind of fantasy story based off of a novel, which is also available in English. This only got a DVD release in the UK and Australia, I believe. It has a dub. I don't know why it was never released in the US. It's not a perfect film. Like, the pacing is kind of all over the place. It's a very, very, very long novel, so I can totally understand why they cut bits and pieces out of it. But I don't know why they would worry about dubbing it and releasing it in English territories and then not the largest English-speaking territory in the world, or at least the largest market for anime and manga English-speaking territory. It just seems like a weird thing. And there's some beautiful animation in this. The story's a bit of a mess, and it kind of is a little bit incomprehensible, but overall, like, it's a pretty effective film still. It's a fantasy, but it's mainly about a young boy, elementary school kid, and his struggles with grief and acceptance and moving on. Next to that is Millennium Actress. I've mentioned before earlier in the video that I'm going to be replacing that with the Blu-ray, which is a recent release, or about to be a recent release, from Shout Factory. My favorite of Satoshi Kon's films. Really, really wonderful. It's a kind of a perspective of a particular actress's life and how her personality melds into the roles that she's taken over her career. Beautiful, powerful, really lovely, and just beautiful film. Just overall beautiful. Next to that is the Daft Punk and Leiji Matsumoto collaboration with Interstellar 5555, The Story of the Secret Star System, which is basically a prolonged music video with Daft Punk music and Leiji Matsumoto's alien characters. It's a bit of fun. It's not, again, perfect, and I'm pretty sure the Blu-ray release of this looks atrocious, which is why I never bought it. Oh, Tokyo Godfather's postcard in there. Next to that, we have Toward the Terra, which is the film adaptation of To Terra, the manga. There's been a couple different adaptations of Toward the Terra, and this is the film. And each of them are different. The manga is different from the TV show, which is different from the film, and all of them do different things. But I really like this manga. Again, I'm not a huge sci-fi fan, but 70s sci-fi, especially written by women in the 70s, like, although this is a shonen, Keiko Takamiya, who's a year 24 mangaka, it's really great. It's about genocide and all of those things. So really wonderful. And it does have a more recent television anime adaptation as well. Next to that is the film adaptation of Clannad. This is by Toei Filmworks, I think. Yep, Toei Animation. So obviously this is not... It's the same story or the same characters, the same thing, adapting the visual novel as the Culinary show, but it's a film, and it's not nearly as comprehensive. I think it just, adapts the main storyline of Clannad, which I haven't watched in a long time. It's super duper cheap. I don't even know if Sentai still has this for sale, but it was just kind of we'll plop it on disc. It's not like a must watch. If you're wanting a more comprehensive Clannad release, then of course the television anime is the way to go. But yeah, still a pretty interesting curiosity of the Key works and how Key has been adapted over the years. Next to that is the OVA release of Please Save My Earth, which is a Pioneer and Viz video release. This is an OVA. Is it 4 episodes? 6 episodes. Super duper old disc release. I found it locally. I've been wanting to watch it for a long time because, again, a shoujo sci-fi that I'm pretty interested in. And I believe this... I haven't actually watched that one. I believe it's about a group of scientists in space who are having weird recurring dreams where they realize that they have been reincarnated from a previous group of individuals, and thus their personal relationships have changed and the drama that comes from that. We also have a super duper old Tokyo Pop release with Spring and Chaos. Interesting, as you can see from the creator of Escaflowne and Macross, but this is Shoji Kawamori, who is done... The whole story is done in like a cat style. All of the characters are done in a cat style because this is adapting Miyazawa, like his life, his biography, who is a very well-known author, short story author, pre-war author, who wrote one of the most famous stories in Japan, which I've already mentioned in this video again as well, which is the Night on the Galactic Railroad. And in the film adaptation of that, the characters are drawn as cats, anthropomorphic cats. So in this, which is his biography, they decided to do anthropomorphic cats. And in another adaptation, film adaptation of his works, they also use anthropomorphic cats. So lots of cats. And then finally, this is actually a Blu-ray release of Mind Game. This is the crowdfunded release from Studio 4 Degrees Celsius. This is, I believe, the first of Yuasa's works. Very weird. Not super easy to recommend, and it does have a wider release now. You can just get like a standard release from G-Kids or Shout Factory or someone. So I can't say like it's a necessity, and this particular release isn't, the standard, but if you like Yuasa's work, if you don't mind some kind of psychedelic trippiness to your films, then check it out.